Okay, the next steps that I will take is to essentially work on the motherboard on the table to the extent I can. Again, I have watched Carrie do this many times, fortunately, so it looks like it'll be fairly straightforward. Every time I turn this machine on in the future, I'll have a little bit of satisfaction knowing that I built it. So let's go. I just wanted to make a quick update about the case here. After discovering last night that the fans in here were only 3-pin fans and controlled by the case, actually 2 of them were plugged into the motherboard, probably running full speed, obviously. You can put a 3-pin fan connector into a 4-pin fan location on the motherboard, but you won't have any speed control. This case actually provides speed control and the connectors to plug, I think, up to 5 fans in, as well as 2-pin connectors to illuminate RGB or LED if you happen to have a fan that does that. But I wanted to show something great about this case, and so I went online last night and I purchased a 120 millimeter and 140 millimeter fan. One I intend to put up here, and the other, the 140, I will put in the back, and then I'll plug those into the motherboard so that I can get control of them through the BIOS. But great thing about this case I wanted to demonstrate, the panels in here, and actually they supply panels like this all the way up to the top. Obviously I removed 3 of them for the 2 drives and the USB additional panel. But these inserts come out by just squeezing the side. And one of the motivators for me to order the fans is I have total access to this front fan to remove it just by pulling these panels out. I think there's one zip tie I may have to snip, but I should be able to install this fan relatively quickly, and also the one in the back clearly is also easy access. So those will run off the motherboard, the upper 200 millimeter fan and the other 120 on the side here. I think I may, for now, continue to control them by the case. I don't even think they're necessary, given all the ventilation in this case. And oh, by the way, one other nice little feature about this, it includes a storage drawer down below, which in here I have bracketry in case I put in a 3¼ inch drive. One of these panels has a cutout. Not that I intend to put a floppy drive in here, but one could, I suppose. Or they make inserts that actually have USB 3 and USB 2 that you could use that panel for, and you can locate this panel anywhere up here. I just chose to put my USB connectors below my drives, just so when the trays open and close, they don't guillotine or get interfered from the anything plugged in here into the USB positions. But I just wanted to make that note for the record. The other thing I've decided is that it's probably risky to try to just leave the cables in place when I install the motherboard, because guaranteed I'm going to lose one underneath the motherboard after I put all the screws down, and then realize when I go to plug everything in that I got one stuck under the motherboard and I'll have to pull the whole thing out. So given the sort of nightmare of the cable management right now, I'm going to pull everything out the back before I install the motherboard. And this case provides such clean access into the motherboard compartment that it'll be easy to put them back, and it'll be a much neater cable management job by doing it that way. The Noctua fans arrived quicker than I expected. I got them within like a day and a half. The 2 models I bought were NFP12 and NFP14S. Again, they're 4-pin, and that will allow the motherboard to control the fan speed. As I had hoped, the install went very quickly. Again, having access to that front fan was made it real easy. Back one also similarly installed fairly fast. I also decided to go ahead and clear the wiring so when I get the motherboard all built up, which is basically my next step, I'll have all the wiring out of the way and back. Believe it or not, a gaggle of these wires here all have to do with the fact that this case was built to control the fans with a built-in fan speed control, and I got to figure out how to tuck those out of the way. I'm still going to use that fan speed control for the other fans in the case, the 200 millimeter on top and the 120 on the side. Again, I'm not even sure they're necessary given all the ventilation and the type of equipment I'm going to be running in here. Okay, the case has been prepped, the new fans are installed. I have the cables out of the way, so the case is going to be ready to accept this motherboard once I populate it and get it built up, at least to the extent I can. The Mugen cooler heatsink fins will go in after everything is in the case. For the same reasons that Carrie mentions, it probably is going to, it's a big cooler and it's probably going to interfere with my ability to plug in the CPU connectors. So let's begin. I didn't really do any kind of unboxing on this motherboard because there's quite a few of those already on the internet. I am going to be consistent with all or most of the builders I see on YouTube and build this up on the box. It seems to be a very convenient platform. The AORUS Master motherboard, again, I think is a good choice for me. It has features on here that will allow me to, basically replace that G1Assassin. Some of the things I like about it is even though on the back panel it may have a few less USB contacts on it as some of the other motherboards, they're all USB 3.1, 3.2 USB-C, and there's a fair number of them. But honestly, on day-to-day use, I like having those connectors in the front of my case. It's a big case, and it sits on the floor, tucked up more or less against a wall, and to plug USB devices in. I'd much prefer having a case with 5 1/4 inch panels in front where I can add extra USB connectors. This board, believe it or not, in the board it actually provides USB 2, and I have connectors on my case and also on the accessory panel that I've just bought to take advantage of the USB 2. I typically use those for things like my wireless USB mouse and keyboard, so they'll come in handy. It also provides 2 USB 3 connectors for a total of 4 USB 3 connectors I can have in the front of my case. Board is heavily armored. By armored I mean it's pretty safe to build it on the box, because if you notice, the back of this board is solid metal, basically protecting all the contacts. This board has 3 M.2 positions in between the PCIe connectors. The 3 connectors on here, I believe, are X16, which is where the video card will plug in, X8, and X4. The M.2, the first one here, is the CPU, which kind of has its own cover. And then there's this big plate here for the second and third M.2 drive. There are some dependencies. Again, I talked about those earlier. As far as I can tell, reading the literature on this board, the CPU connector talks directly to the processor, and since it's I say not only since it's an 11th gen, but actually must be an 11th gen processor in order for this first M.2 location to even be used. So it's a direct pipeline. Similarly, the video card that's also sitting in the X16 bus here, the first PCI connector, has a pretty much uninterrupted run to the CPU. So since I have to push a lot of data back and forth to process it, since again the GPU is doing the bulk of the processing on some of these video files, and because of the way a lot of the programs are written today. The GoPro Max player software, for instance, that I use quite a bit, and was the main reason I've been doing some of these upgrades on this machine over the past year or so. It relies heavily on the GPU, and that's why I was forced to upgrade. So having a clean patch between fast memory and the GPU, which is crunching data and sending it back, was important. I hear a lot of people brag about how many stages are in, I forget what they call the power stages here, VRM, something like that, for the processor. You know, I hear people parrot the numbers on the box, you know, so I think this has like 12 or 13 stages, so that must be better than 10, right, or 8. You know, it really depends, doesn't it, on the designer and the components they chose to use and how they chose to use them. So I'm sure this board will function just fine. Again, I'm going to be putting 32 gig of RAM in here and an 11th generation i5 11600K processor. One of the first things I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to remove these metal panels here, both because out of curiosity and so I can put those little M.2 screws in the 2 positions that I'm not currently planning to use. Again, I probably won't look at these for some time, but I am curious just to see what's under there. I'll then be doing all the standard steps that you've seen Carrie do again and again, putting in the processor, putting in the M.2 memory. I think I will put the Mugen bracketry in before I put the memory in, just so it's easy to handle and I'm not putting any stress or pressing on the memory. So those brackets will go in, then I'll populate the RAM in. Again, I'm curious if, yeah, they do have a little diagram here. I think Kerry talked about it in one of his videos. They want you to, if you're going to only use 2 sticks instead of 4, to put it in the A2 and B2 slots. So that's counting from the processor. That would be the 2nd and 4th positions. And this way you will get advantage of the 2 channels, 2-channel memory. I've seen people make the mistake of putting it in the 1st and 2nd slot, and that's really just allowing you to use 1 channel. And I've also seen a lot of pre-builts. There's a fellow from I think he's in Canada. He seems to do a lot of evaluation of these pre-built machines. He buys them out of China or wherever from vendors, and then rips them down. And then one of his major complaints I've seen him complain about on a lot of these so-called pre-built gaming machines is they give you 1 stick of video. So they may brag about 16 gigabyte, you get 1 stick in 1 slot. And he sort of complains about that, but honestly, I'd almost prefer that, because then I can buy another stick of 16 and get 32. If he gives you 2 8 gigabyte memories, the inclination is, well, geez, I want more memory, so now am I going to put 2 sticks of 16 to complement the 2 sticks of 8? If I start with 1 stick of 16, I can add a 2nd stick of 16, and then if I want to upgrade to 32, I could add 2 more. You get the idea. So I'm not sure. I'm sure the gaming companies, or the companies that build these gaming machines pre-built, are looking at cost savings. So I'm going to have to remove some of this plastic here. I'm not going to take time to show you that. I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to be removing these covers. Screwdrivers. Want to talk quickly about screwdrivers. I found in the course of working on this machine that you're well advised to get a quality set of screwdrivers. I had picked up let's say an inexpensive set from let's just say a distributor out there that sells a lot of tools, and they almost gave them away free, and I noticed they had a tendency to do some awful things to Phillips screwdrivers. So these happen to be some old Craftsman drivers that I've had for years. And I have picked up other sets, some of them to accommodate specialized screws in some devices. But you're well advised to get a good quality screwdriver. You can do more damage with a cheap one. I found in trying to pull these covers off, I had to go get this driver here. I know Kerry talks about the M.2 screws and how they seem to prefer a special screwdriver. I'm not sure exactly what size this is. I think it's smaller than a 1. It just come out of Sears years ago. Okay, this one's a 2. And again, they don't tend to put sizes on these, P2, whatever that is. Anyway, the small one seems to fit these screws, and I had to give a little bit of direct pressure down to make sure that I'm not doing bad things to the heads of the Phillips. I found these metal trays, by the way, which I've also picked up at that same tool outlet. Come in very handy, magnetic. And there we go, one down. Just need to adjust the light here a little bit so I can see. I want to pay attention to see if these screws are possibly different on either side. There's nothing worse than having a bunch of screws only to find out that they're different lengths. I know the production people where I used to work, there's a nut on here. That's interesting. This screw does not come out, really. There's some kind of nut on here. And I'm going to leave this plastic on for now. So there it is. Let me just tip this up. So that's the position for the CPU M.2. I believe it's an 80 millimeter in length. So I think where this boss is right now is actually the right location. I've heard some people say this particular M.2 drive can get warm, so I think the heat sink's a good thing. And clearly there's no screw in here at the moment. Anyway, let's proceed to take this plate off. Now again, I want to just check these screws just to make sure. It's always good to keep track of where the screw came out, because you may find, again, a lot of engineers will design a piece of equipment, and for whatever reasons they will have a bunch of the same, let's say a 1032 screw, and they'll have like a dozen different lengths, which tends to drive the production people nuts, because they have to buy. First, you got to buy all those special lengths, and then you got to hope that on the production floor somebody doesn't like put the wrong length screw in. In fact, there's a gentleman in Florida. I think his channel is STS, who repairs iPhones. It's fascinating for me to watch somebody take apart an iPhone, because I'm not about to, and he's a magician with the repairs, and he's working with under microscopes a lot of the times. And one of the main failures that he's seen, he tends to get phones that other people tried to repair, quote unquote, as repair people who obviously didn't know what they were doing. And apparently in some of those models, the identical thread screws have different lengths, and he has repaired, I've seen him repair more than one phone that was busted because of, quote unquote, screw damage. In other words, when they were putting the thing back together, they took a screw that was just probably a millimeter too long, put it in the wrong place, and then that screw basically dug its way into the circuit board and started breaking connections underneath the screw. And his skills are so fine that he's actually gone in there and reconnected tracks that people have caused by screw damage. So when you take a screw out, always take a look at it and be cautious of how long it is. Okay, I think I got all 4. Oh, okay, maybe not. See, I thought this was coming off. Apparently not. It's just up front here. There we go. And that's the second piece of metal here. And did I already lose a screw? Of course. No, maybe not. Just checking here. You know, these are little, yeah, okay, I want to make sure I didn't drop a screw somewhere on this circuit board. That would be bad. So anyway, here's the 2 and 3 position. I'm not sure if they write down in the data sheets, they actually have names. Yeah, M2M, and I think the other one might be M2P. That's how they refer to, you know, distinguish these 3 apart. Well, that definitely says M2M. I can't see on the first one. I think it was P. Then they tell you this is a PCI EX4. This is a PCI EX8. And this is a PCI X16. I checked both of the graphics cards I have, the GTX 1060 6 gigabyte card and the GTX 1650 Super, and they both claim to be 16X cards. So they clearly, this is the first slot is where that graphics card wants to go. All right, I'm going to find those little packets with the screws and put 2 of them in here. And then I'll be putting this cover back on, and then we'll get to work. You know, I could put this M.2 card in now, but not having ever put a CPU into this type of socket, I'm a little paranoid. I want to make sure before I foul up or glue that very expensive memory into here that I get that CPU in successfully. I'm not going to install the drive. Both the heatsink here on top, and it turns out the base on this memory card here, the solid state drive, M.2 drive, they have plastic that has to be removed, and I'm concerned there's adhesive on them or whatever, thermal grease. I'm not sure what they use in order to make sure the heat gets transferred to the plate. Almost feels like that's a thermal pad. By the way, thermal pads are not very good for transferring heat. I don't know how many times I thought, gee, that's a good idea. They have these little thin sponges that you know, called thermal pads, and every time I mention those to the thermal engineers at work, they kind of get red in the face and try to explain to me without embarrassing me that they're really not that efficient in moving heat. But I digress. So now the big step here, finally. Now again, this processor did not come in the retail box. It came packaged basically in a bubble envelope in this holder, which looks like obviously it was made to hold a CPU, possibly the ones that they upgraded. So definitely Core i5 11600K, and I'm reading this because one of the Kerry's points was that there are 2, and again, I don't know if you can see them in this light, but trust me, there are 2 notches on the substrate that this case sits on, the substrate being the pads under here, the gold-plated pads that make contact to the die underneath this lid. And on this particular socket, they're located down near the bottom on either side. And I'm sure when I pop this open, I'm going to see little tabs so that this can only go in one way. But he also mentioned that the reading, the way I'm sitting here, facing in this direction, I should be able to read the letters on here normally. In other words, they should be right side up like I'm reading, going in this way. The other point that I haven't heard Kerry talk about, I've seen him try to repair the sockets under here. There's a good reason why they protect these LGA 1200 type sockets. And again, I haven't built a board in a long time. Honestly, the last time I installed a processor, it used something called a zero insertion force type connector, which is totally different. Those little gold things that Kerry always examines here when he pops the lid open are sometimes referred to as interposers. If you looked under a microscope, I guarantee what you'll see there isn't quite a bed of nails, but more like a bed of tiny little diving boards that are gold plated. Each one of those contacts is actually a little tiny spring, gold plated spring. And the way this socket is designed, when this chip goes on and you close the lid, you'll always hear Kerry say, make sure it gets under this screw here. Well, the reason for that is you're trying to take these hundreds of contacts here and you're trying to make sure they make contact with those hundreds of little tiny springs under there. And again, they're more like diving boards. And then when you pry this down, the point is you want to keep even pressure on that processor. You don't really want it to put more pressure on one side than the other. You want it to go straight down so that all the springs get compressed at the same time. And this so-called screw under here is actually a wedge. And so as I'm pulling this lever down, what's going to happen is the fork here needs to make sure that's underneath, because that wedge is what is going to help this top here push down on the processor straight up and down and make solid contact with all those springs under there, those interposer type contacts. So I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but honestly, until I watched Kerry, I'll tell you, I would have probably screwed this up so bad if I hadn't either read or watched him. And what I mean by that is I would have seen this plastic cover and my first thought would have been, it says remove. Okay, so do I remove that first? I don't think so. I never saw Kerry remove that, okay, even though it says remove there. I would have removed it. And God knows what kind of trouble I would have got myself into if I did that. And I'm forgetting my cardinal sin here. All right, it's the big moment here. I've talked enough, delayed enough. This is probably the scariest part of this whole build because of the cost of these parts and the delicacy of those contacts. So here we are, and sure enough, I can see the two bosses here and here that, you know, the little nibs take a cut out of the board here. And again, it's amazing how much spring force those contacts actually have. So it's in here, it looks good. Now, again, make sure you pull back. I noticed I had to pull back on this to make sure that this fork is going to get wedged under this wedge here, so that when I drive this down and then lock it underneath, voila, it is removed. And it does it automatically. And as Kerry said, don't lose this. You may need it. Okay, processor is in place. Wow. You have no idea what kind of relief that is. I can see why Mitch kind of shakes every time Kerry has him do it. I think Kerry has Mitch put those in just so he can have fun watching. Again, it's a very delicate area. Oh, that's memory. I don't want to put my RAM in where my M2 memory is supposed to go. Like I say, I've heard a lot of controversy, not only about the so-called fourth generation M.2 drives, but also, and by controversy, whether fourth generation really buys you much for the money, is what they're really saying. I already explained why I decided to go this way. There is a fellow out there who did some evaluation of the Samsung 980 Pro against a Western Digital Black, and I forget the alphabet soup numbers on the Western Digital drive, and he concluded that, you know, this drive is probably fine for gaming. He actually had some charts, comparison charts, that would have had me maybe think about getting a Western Digital Black. Now, I don't honestly know anything about either one of these drives. I went with Samsung because of its long-standing reputation, because of all of the good things people had to say about it. The fact that already in this machine I had a Samsung SATA solid-state drive, you know, 4.5 years ago. And, you know, I like the Imagician software and everything about it. And so I happened to catch a Carrie show the other night, and it caught my attention because I think he was talking about the i5 11600K processor, and he also mentioned Western Digital and the Samsung. And after hearing Carrie's side, I'm thinking I'm glad I got the Samsung. Now, I honestly don't know. I've never had those two processors. One thing I did notice by that fellow, and again I can't remember his name. It's something like Nikos, I think. You know, he did a lot of good tests, but I noticed in some of the tests he had like a 1 terabyte version of one drive and a 2 terabyte version of the other. Now, something I heard, and one of the motivators for me, by the way, to get this drive was I heard two stories out there that were kind of interesting. One is that some manufacturers, again, some manufacturers, I'm not even sure who they are, were kind of doing a bait and switch with their M.2 drives. And I know that there's different architectures that they use on these drives, depending on how many layers they stack up. There's, you know, a quad, there's a quad version of some drives that are less money, and then there are some that have like 3 levels, and again, I'd have to go back and look at what they all mean, but the bottom line is, I guess it's cheaper to make the quad, and some companies had substituted without changing any of the part numbers. So, you know, you buy this drive, you think you're getting the same thing that, you know, people benchmarked when it was first released, and you're actually buying a slightly different set of chips in there. The other thing, and so that's one story, right? You know, again, be cautious. With some vendors may make changes, which, you know, they probably have in the fine print they're allowed to do, but you may not be getting what you thought. The second is the idea of cache, and that gets back to these benchmarks that this gentleman did on the Western Digital and on the Samsung. I noticed he was using what he had, and so sometimes he was comparing a 2 terabyte drive against a 1 terabyte drive. And I've always heard the importance of cache, and, you know, cache I'm trying to think of a good analogy. The best one I could think of is a restaurant that has a pantry, and so the chefs are in back doing all the cooking, and then they put the food up in the pantry, so when the waiters come in to serve, the food is right there for them to grab and bring out to the table. Well, that means that, you know, they can prevent a bottleneck, right? At least to the extent that there is food in the pantry, and the chefs have put some in there ahead of time. But when they run out, you know, now they rely on how fast the cooks can bring food into the pantry. So it's that kind of thing. The cache is a rapid type release of data, and it turns out that on the 1 terabyte drives, they typically provide one gig of cache, and on the 2 terabyte drives, they provide 2 gigs of cache. Now, you've probably seen, and I've seen, when I transfer a big file, especially like on a USB stick, I'll notice like for the first 5 seconds, it's like, wow, this thing is screaming, look at that data come across. And then all of a sudden, the rate of transfer drops, and you say, what happened? It was doing so well, and now it's like at a quarter of the transfer rate. And now what do? I don't want to interrupt it, so you sit there for it took about 10 seconds for 1/4 of your data to get transferred, and then all of a sudden now you got to sit there for like 10 times the amount of time till the rest of it finally moves over. And I think if you're going to do benchmarks like that, clearly if I had 2 gigs worth of cache in that case, or whatever the mechanism is that's allowing that transfer to be really fast at the beginning, I could move a little more data, and it might give me better results depending on my file size. So that's just another lesson. I mean, there are parameters in these things. Stick with Carrie's parts list, and you will be very happy in the end. Or do some research. There's a lot out there to learn. They say that you've reached wisdom the day you recognize the fact that there's way more stuff out there you don't know than you do know. And that is an absolute fact. That's the mark of somebody who is becoming wise. It's just endless. It is absolutely endless. And that's why people like Carrie and his channel are worth its weight in gold. It just saves so much time and worry. And I'm just doing the unboxing here of the Samsung, and there's a manual I'll probably never look at, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, now I know how he said to do this, but I also noticed I got this blue piece of cellophane here that they probably want me to peel off and remove. So I'll do that. I'll take this drive out of the box here, and again, who would have known? Now I gotta make sure I get it in the right place. And as Kerry points out, it sits up at an angle, and there's actually a couple places I might have tried sticking it, but right up under the top level of plastic was where it did insert, and inserted easily. And as Kerry pointed out, I wouldn't have known this. It's like a diving board. Even my son-in-law, by the way, I had him watch Kerry install one of these, and he says, oh. So even he learned something. All right, now I got to get that third little precious, yeah, that precious screw, which I can't find right now. Oh, here it is. Yeah, and I'm hoping that my number one or number whatever little driver here from Craftsman will do the job. I didn't go out and buy that special tip from Japan. But I'm not sure how many of these I'll be doing in my life. This is, I built I want to say I built a few machines. I've modified, a number of them. In pieces, I have done a lot with these machines, but I've actually never really done all of this in one operation, if you know what I mean. I've installed memory, I've troubleshot RAM. I actually upgraded a processor on the first machine that I bought, which was actually I purchased as a bare bones, so it came with a processor. For reasons I'm not going to go into, I had to upgrade the processor. I think it was a Athlon 1200 or something like that. Goes way back, and I've upgraded cards and things. I've never really had one of these M.2 drives, and other than that Athlon processor, I've never really had to deal with these interposer type, LGA 1200 type sockets. Although I am very familiar with the interposers, obviously. We used those on a job a ways back, and the ones we used actually had diving boards on both sides. And that's where I got the word interposer. They were really made to connect. In our case, we were connecting to a whole bunch of video die, and they were sitting on a ceramic board, and we needed to bring thousands of signals out, and these interposers, did the job neatly. There's actually hundreds of patents out there on the designs of those little diving boards and interposers. I mean, it was amazing. I had to do some research into that. Now, how much do you tighten? When I'm putting in the Mugen bracketry, I'm gonna tell a story that goes back to my first job out of college. Engineering graduate. My original degree was electrical engineering. I kind of moved way beyond that in the sense that every day I was on the job, I was learning and taking courses and getting skills in areas beyond what I had a degree in. But I had this interesting story that I'll tell you when I install the Mugen bracketry, and it has to do with how much torque do you give a screw. And I have a funny story about that, because I was watching Carrie install a Mugen cooler, and it was very helpful, because I can now open up that box and I know which parts to use and which parts not to use, and sort of remember which way the brackets have to go and so on. But he was torquing down on those, I guess you call them bosses, or I forget there was a name for them, but the inserts that eventually the plates screw onto, the base plate underneath that you're screwing into from the top, he's torquing those screws, and I'm thinking, my God. And you'll see when I get there and talk about what happened to me and why these days in a good manufacturing facility the technicians all have torque drivers, because when I got out of school I thought I was cool, knew what I was doing, and I over-tightened something in front of my new co-workers, and it caused me, when I saw Kerry tighten down on that screw, to cringe. I hate it when I hear a sound like that. Okay, I think I'm done. Yeah, okay, I got both plastics off. That's down there. Again, when it comes to Phillips, you really got to press down. All right, that feels snug. There are different levels of torque. Lightly, a little snug, really snug, and then tight, and then over tight. And I saw Kerry put that Mugen bracket on, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you're just gonna squeeze that motherboard. Okay, so 2 down. So I think at this point, I'm going to crack into the Mugen 5 box. And again, just so I'm not pushing on the memory, I'm going to install the base part of that bracketry first, and then we'll install the memory. And I'm afraid I'm almost at the point then where this thing might have to go in the case. So that's a good thing, right? Okay, I cracked into the Mugen 5 box. The truth is I had cracked into it much earlier because they give you a free screwdriver, and it actually came in handy working on the G1Assassin to remove it. And here's the kit. Nice, even give you a Ziploc bag. Now, Carrie has gone through this numerous times. I don't even think he bothers anymore. By the way, here's the Magic Scythe thermal grease, which was the big motivator for me to just go out and buy the cooler, because it's pretty good stuff. You know, there might be some things on the market you can pay 10 or 20 bucks for a tube like this, and it might get you a few degrees. I don't think even in the best case any more than maybe 4 or 5. And there are things a lot worse than this. You know, keep in mind the amount you're trying to press 2 flat plates together. Now, as a co-worker and a great mechanical engineer I worked with once pointed out that, you know, you never really have completely flat plates, and when you put 2 flat things together, they touch at 3 points. You know, I mean, that's just kind of geometry type of thing. Yeah, you can push them and make them maybe touch in more than 3, but at that point you've deformed something. Right? It's no longer flat, and not that anything is truly flat. I mean, we strive for it in optics and things. There are some people that actually polish. They would not leave the case like this. They would lap it until it shined like a mirror, just because they think that would get them that few extra degrees down. There are people that actually delid these things. That scares the heck out of me. I mean, I've watched it, all for the purpose of getting this case closer to the die and removing that little extra heat because they're going to overclock or do something crazy. My son-in-law's talked about that. I'm thinking, no, never happened. So that interface is important, and the cooler is important. And I was happy to hear Kerry the other day mention that the i5s may not burn as hot. These K processors, the i5, 7, and 9. If you look at the spec sheets, they all say 125 watt. But this only has 6 cores, and the i7s, I think, in the 11th generation have 8. And the one my son-in-law bought, the i9 10900 K, I believe, has 10 cores. So Intel was trying to catch up clearly with the other brand, AMD. But interestingly, it's not clear to me. You can have all the cores in the world, but if you don't write software to take advantage of them, I'm not sure what good they do you. Like I say, I was surprised with the GoPro software. I actually volunteered, and I got no compensation from anybody, by the way, on anything I'm mentioning here, or any company. I get no compensation from anybody. You know, what was that comedian used to say? I get no respect. I don't make money off any of this. I'm doing this today because I've never done it before, and for Kerry and for you guys and ladies out there who watch this channel. My hope is that Kerry even bothers watching this, and I would love it if he shared it under his website, and if he gets any compensation out of it from YouTube, that is a clear contribution to his channel, and it's a small way of saying thank you for the great job you do, Kerry. Okay, so here's one of the reasons I cringed a little bit, partly because when I was again, I was just out of school, you know, maybe a few weeks, and I'm working with engineers who really get their hands dirty. That's one of the great pleasures I had in my career was I spent more time in the lab than I did at my desk, at least certainly in the beginning. And so we're building a prototype system, getting it ready to transfer to production, and I'm the new kid on the block, you know, and so I'm very respectful of everybody, including all the technicians, because they know way more than I know. And they're putting this thing together, and I guess there was a power transistor that had blown, and it was in what's called a TO3 can. Now, that TO3 can, if you've ever seen a power transistor, they're those diamond-shaped cans with a little squat top hat on top, and there's 2 holes on either side. that you use to mount it down typically to a heatsink. I mean, that's one of the main purposes of that type of case, was that the die inside is creating heat just as we use coolers from the top. Those packages pulled heat down through the base of the case. So they had to put a new transistor in, and they told me where to go in the cabinet. And I said, oh, by the way, you need to put a ceramic spacer underneath before you screw it down to the heatsink. Now, the ceramic spacer does a couple of things. First of all, it does help conduct the heat. It's a type of ceramic that will move the heat down to the aluminum. It's an electrical isolator, so it gives you some isolation between the case and the heatsink. And oftentimes on those cases, one of the collector base emitters are often tied to the case. And so I'm trying to look like I know what I'm doing. You know, I mean, I've built stuff before. I've turned the screwdriver, obviously, before. You know, I graduated and started working here, but I'm the new kid on the block, and I want to look like I know what I'm doing. And so I put this together. I got the ceramic spacer where it belongs. I put the transistor down. I can't remember if there was thermal grease involved. But you know, the old story was, okay, you use a screw. It's probably a number 6, and on the other side, flat washer, lock washer, nut, you know, on either side. And I'm tightening it up, and I want to make sure I'm doing a good job. And all of a sudden, one of the engineers turns around and he goes, "What's that crunching sound?" And I look up at him, you know, and he turns around and he sees like white ceramic powder falling out from underneath the power transistor. I had torqued it so much that I had totally shattered the ceramic spacer underneath the power transistor. And all I can remember is some reference to a gorilla that came at me, and I'm red in the face, and I had to do it again. And the next time I got it right, it taught me a lesson about, you know, the ability of the human hand to discern how much torque you're putting on a screw. Now, the funny thing is, about a year or so later, that system had moved into production, and I walked in there and I'm noticing everybody putting things together, and nobody had any kind of torque screwdriver. They were all, you know, using the judgment of their experience to figure out how tight to make a screw. And trying to show how smart I am, I went to the production foreman and I said, "Hey, how come your people don't use, like, you know, torque wrenches and torque screwdrivers so that, you know, you get a consistent build?" And he looked at me like, you know, "Come on, kid," you know, still feeling a little wet behind the ears even after a year or so. And you know, they kind of like, "Listen, kid, you know, my people know what they're doing," type of story. So okay, I'm not about to argue with this gentleman about his production people and how capable they are. And I know, I mean, my father was a mechanic. You know, you can tighten screws, you know, with your hand, and if you've done it enough, and you know, on parts, you know, don't try it on ceramic apparently, but you know, you can judge pretty well how much force you're putting. But there's an interesting story in the last few years. I was at a production facility. I had a lot of continuous years of service with the company I worked for, and I had moved to different locations, so I'm up in Nashua at this point. And I walk out on the production floor, and I notice that every production technician out there is using a torque screwdriver now in order to tighten screws. And clearly that makes sure that every build is consistent, that the right amount of pressure is put on the screw, and that you're not going to over tighten it or over torque it. And I was happy to see that. You know, I learned my lesson. You know, you learn from your mistakes, and I tried applying them. You know, and at first, obviously, my recommendation to, you know, after 1 year out of college wasn't accepted, but eventually somebody figured it out. And so when I saw Gary tightening that Mugen cooler thing, this bracket down, I'm thinking, you know, see, there's rubber here. And I have I have squeeze screws down with rubber pads in between, and they don't really stop until they're mush. So, and understand this is part of a spring system, and that's the other thing I wanted to mention. The rubber is here not only to isolate and insulate this base plate on the back of this motherboard where I'm going to install it. If you look at the Mugen cooler, and this is the important thing. I don't know if you can see it here, but there's the screw you're going to tighten. And there's a spring here between the screw and this boss here. And when you tighten the screw down onto the stud that you're going to put on top here and attach this to on the underside, you're going to compress this spring. Now you're going to compress this spring and tighten it, and meanwhile, while you do that, you're essentially pulling up on this bracket. So what you've done now is you're compressing this flat plate against the processor, and you're using this spring and the spring of this rubber in order to put that squeeze pressure between these two plates. And of course, at that point, I'll have removed, and oh geez, I thought there was a plastic coating on here. It either fell off or I can't see it right now. It may be there. Let's hope so, because I'm going to have to clean it otherwise. Yeah, okay, here it is. All right, time to get the rubbing alcohol out. My point is that this cooler is being mounted on here in a compression system comprised of the rubber on this bottom plate here and the springs in the Mugen cooler. And I'm willing to bet that the lands here that screw is sitting through and the springs are pressing against should never come in contact with the headers here, spacers, that it's going to screw into. In other words, you don't want to bottom out, is what I'm saying on that. You want those springs to be active and putting squeeze pressure on between the cooler and that processor. And the thermal grease is just used because it's better than air. I mean, if air was a great conductor of heat, you wouldn't need any thermal grease, right? Because anything that's not making full contact probably has air in there. And so the thermal grease is better than air. And like I say, if you're in a real pinch, maybe your grandmother has some Polident around. And apparently, like I say, just stay away from the Procter & Gamble toothpaste. Anyway, enough of that. I'm going to get to work here. Okay, I admit it, I had to cheat here a little bit. I took the Mugen parts, out of the box, and I'm scratching my head thinking, okay, I know I know Kerry said use the tall ones, okay. But I couldn't remember if you use the short screws or the long screws, so I had to pull the paperwork out of the Mugen box. And actually, the reason I wanted to show you this is it's a wonderful chart here that Mugen gives you. It has great pictures of the parts, and they give you the different types of socket, from Intel and AMD, and clearly. We have the 1200, which is this middle column. So you can see, obviously, you use that black back plate and the taller inserts here, standoffs. And, they show you the two brackets you need, which is basically this one for the Intel processor, two of those facing each other, and the short screws. And then you keep looking down and you say, okay, here's the long screws. Those are for the AMD, and so on. And obviously the thermal grease is used for everything. And the screwdriver, I will treasure and probably use often. And then the fan clips. And then there's a really nice walkthrough here, showing you which way these brackets go on. Short of reading this, you watch Kerry and you'll know exactly what to do. But if you're like me and you forget 5 minutes later what he said, you do have that to fall back on in the Mugen kit. Well, I have the parts I need for this assembly and this little magnetic tray. Again, I highly recommended, you get something like this. The man I mentioned who works on iPhones down in Florida, sometimes he uses a magnetic mat. So when he takes the little screws out of there, he can keep track of the long versus the short screws, which apparently, for some reason on iPhones, they do that. And like I say, he's repaired many a phone where the person who tried to repair it before him put the long screw in the short screw hole and wound up crunching out a whole bunch of traces underneath. Does not bode well for an iPhone if you do that, and he's had to repair incredible stuff. Okay, thank you, Carrie, again, for walking me through this. The two holes here on this plate, and obviously the rubber goes towards the back of the board, and the two holes go where the two bosses are up here in the back. And I need to hold it here, and as he says, just get one of them started. Now he tells you which hole, but truthfully, if you align the bosses, there's really only one hole that these things will easily screw into. So I'm going to the opposite corner. Yep, it still will rotate on you. And your screw might fall out. This is awful. He makes it look so easy. Let's try this again. Okay, I think I got that one, but I'm not going to let go here until I get a second one in. Okay, so two are in there, and now I have to go searching for the one that flew out. Oh, here it is. Okay. All right, I'm just making them finger tight here. And then since I don't really own a Torx screwdriver, you didn't think I actually bought one of those, do you? I'm going to use my lightly snug, really snug, and tight, and somewhere probably between snug and tight is the amount of torque I'll put on these puppies. Again, you reach a point where when you tighten the screw down, because you got rubber on the other side, you're compressing the rubber. But this standoff is not going to go any lower. It's already pushed as hard as it can against the board, and so snug to tight is probably what you want to do. Always good when you're tightening and putting torque on something where there's a bunch of them around a circle or a square like this, do diagonal corners. And again, get the feel for, remember you are squeezing hard rubber on the other side. Now see the driver slip there. And that probably means I'm getting real close to as tight as I want to make this. Okay, that's pretty tight. I'm sure Kerry would give it three more turns. Yeah, keep turning till you hear crunch. Oh man, I'll never forget that. But that's how you learn, isn't it? If you never make a mistake, you'll never learn anything. So. Okay, now I got to pay attention to how these brackets go in. I believe I have these brackets positioned the way I am supposed to. It's interesting on Mugen's sheet here, they tell you what hole positions you need for like the 2066 socket. In other words, not the ones I'm using. They don't mention what I mean by holes is the ends on these brackets are. It's like they drilled several close space holes together, so you could almost like 3 positions here. They're almost slots, except you can see they were actually drilled 3 times. Pitches are good, and you know the bracket goes down sort of with these bosses facing inward. There's kind of an ugly side here where you can, that really faces down, and then there's a little bit of a rise here. So you need to rise up in the middle here where the cooler is going to go. And there really is only 2 locations on these ends here that the spacing on this motherboard would allow you to screw these. So let me get this one started, and I'll get the other one started. I'm not going to tighten them yet. I just decided to do a dry fit check of the heatsink, just to make sure that the brackets are in a good position, and I can, you know, the screws from the upper stage can go into the bottom brackets correctly. It turns out there's a fair amount of forgiveness in the slop, if you will, in the screws that will hold this heatsink down, and I had no problem at all matching up to the holes in the brackets down below. So I'm going to remove this now, and I'll be at the point where I can install the memory. So I'm at the point now where processor is installed, the M2 memory is in place, the brackets for the Mugen 5 are in place and dry fit to make sure everything lines up. So that leaves the memory now to go in, and then I'll be ready to install this into the case. Again, the memory I chose, DDR4 2 times 16 gigabyte for a total of 32 gigabyte, 3200 megahertz memory, Vengeance LPX, Corsair Vengeance LPX. The cast latency on this, I believe, is 16. I had to do a little reading just to understand the effects of cast latency and why would one pay more for it. And it really comes down to cast latency is sort of how many clock cycles does it take for the memory to wake up and realize, oh, there's data. It couples hand in hand with the speed of the memory. Now, I mentioned that gentleman who gave us 2 cents about having cast latency of 14 and 3600 memory. And boy, that's actually great in 2 directions, because the cast latency being lower means that takes fewer clock cycles for the reaction time, and the memory speed of 3600. If this motherboard could take advantage of that, higher frequency means faster, you know, and so the 2 together give him a much better latency. I think I saw there's a chart out there that shows cast latency versus speed, and you know, he probably shaves 20%, I'm guessing, something like that off overall timing. This memory, I guess, it comes down to like 10 nanoseconds, and his memory maybe came down to like 7 3/4 or something like that. And it's but you're going to pay twice the price, and is it worth it? You know, I guess if I had all the money in the world, I would have got 4,000, you know, or higher memory. Sure, why not? If it's free, Castlight and CF14, I'll take it if it exists. The thing is, the literature on this motherboard almost implied that 3200 was the max you could go, and so putting anything faster in almost looked like appeared to be a waste. And then I found that, yeah, but you know, this motherboard was designed for overclocking, and there's a switch you can throw in the BIOS that if I had faster memory in here, the motherboard would attempt to run it at that higher frequency. See, right now this motherboard will probably run up to the 3200, and if I had 36 in here and did nothing in the BIOS, it would still run at 3200. The switch in the BIOS allows the motherboard to actually look at the memory and say, oh, you got 3600 memory. Let's try running at that speed. That's neither here nor there. I went with, you know, this memory. Had I gone for higher speed or lower cast latency, it could have cost me twice what I paid for this, which is maybe $135. So let's put these sticks in. The first thing I had to remember, thank you, Kerry, is to peel the label off the Vengeance. Sure enough, there's a plastic cover. You know, they want to protect their name. Again, because of the way the channels are set up here, there are 4 memory positions, and they even tell you in a little chart here, you want to go in the A2 and the B2, which is the 2nd and 4th counting away from the processor. There's also a notch in here, and if you look real close at the socket, you'll see a plastic boss in here. And if you had attempted to plug this in the wrong way around, you shouldn't be able to unless you break something. So it really only goes in one way. And there's a little slot on either side to get it started, so it's centered in the right place. Oh, yeah, I had to open up these tabs. I opened up all 4 of them just in order to get the memory installed. So it's roughly in position now, and I will push down a little more on one side than the other, and you hear that click, click, click. That's what you want to hear. When you push down a little harder on this side, that tab flips up and locks in, and as does that when you push down there. So that memory is now in place, locked in. We'll take the second stick. Again, there's a label on the Vengeance here. Same type of thing. This goes in the 4th position. Make sure you get it between the guides and push down with even pressure until you hear a click on both sides, and then always check to make sure those latches are in all the way. And at this point, I also find it helpful now to close the other 2, because then you can kind of rub your finger along the back and along the front, and in case one of these latches hadn't closed all the way, you can kind of feel that, because it'll be out of alignment with the other 3. So this is all set, ready to go. No. Why am I stopped here? I'm stopped here because when I was doing my case check to see how many standoffs were in there that this board mounts to, there's a total of 9, it occurred to me that one of the holes, this motherboard has 3 mounting holes on the bottom here. One here, one sort of offset from the processor, and then a 3rd one here. And then on the other end, similarly, there's one in the end, one here lining kind of up with the one in the bottom, and a 3rd one in the corner. In the middle, yeah, there's one here and there's one here, but guess where the 3rd one is? I'll lift this board up to show you. Here it is, right under the M2 drive heatsink. and I had forgotten that. So after I attempt to mount this into the case, I'm going to have to remove this, or remove it before I put the motherboard in, so I can get that middle screw in. As I said, I did my case check, and indeed there was an additional standoff for the EATX board that would actually just hit armor on this board. On some other board, it could have easily shorted something. And just for completeness sake, I think some people, and I'm not sure if it's Gigabyte or that EATX is sometimes referred to as an XL ATX. So back in the day, there were two ways of denoting it. I use the EATX version of those extended boards because that's what PC Part Picker happened to have in their selection chart. So I just picked up on the EATX logo, and then I was looking through some paperwork either on the G1Assassin or can't remember the case, but they used XL ATX, which I gather means the same thing. But okay, but for that one screw under the armor, we're ready to start getting the case ready and drop this sucker in. Okay, I've had a slight change of plans this morning. I happened to turn on Carrie, and he was, this was a video where he was checking out some used processors or returns from Amazon. And that paused me to think about this. I had my case here. I've actually pulled all the wiring out. So actually, I'm in a very convenient position here to plug in the power connectors. I already had dry fit the Mugen fan. I'm going to put the heatsink assembly back on, and got a keyboard and a mouse. The mouse is wireless, but the keyboard is plugged in, and I'm going to repurpose this TV set from the kitchen here that has a USB input, and I'm going to give this thing a quick test run just to make sure everything is working. By the way, this card has DisplayPort output. I have this little adapter I bought. I've actually been using this on the G1 computer because the video card has HDMI and DisplayPort, and both of my monitors are HDMI. So this little thing has worked quite well. It only cost a few dollars, but well worth it. I'll plug the power connectors in. I have the DisplayPort to HDMI adapter connected to the TV. I'm now just going to dry fit the heatsink here for the Mugen, and should just about be ready to turn this guy on. This actually turned out to be a good dry run to attach the fan. I decided I'm going to bring the cable out here across the top and down, and actually the clip that holds the fan onto the heatsink acts as a very good latch, if you will, cable tie to secure the wiring from the fan. Also keeps the wiring away from any circuitry in case there's any noise. And Gigabyte has made the CPU connector down here, the 4-pin connector, gray. So they're clearly marked on the board, but it's very convenient to plug in, and I don't have to deal with a lot of the slack if I had located those wires anywhere else. I also decided to plug in the front panel connector from the case here so I can turn the system on and off. It was just laying right here, and I also thought I might as well plug in the HD audio. Should be good to go here. I'm just going to triple check everything, and you can watch me try to light this up for the first time. Fingers crossed. So the challenges of buying used parts, this is a very critical stage for me. I just plugged in the power supply, and Boy, the board lit up. I wasn't expecting that. I did not hit the on-off switch, although the light is red. I'm not sure how this will behave since the M2 drive has nothing on it really. I was hoping, oh, it's just going to start hitting the delete key, and I saw that wonderful AORUS symbol flash up on the screen. I don't have the fancy switches that Kerry has. He said give this a couple of minutes. I'm seeing some codes here, 36, 37, 29. I haven't memorized what the red LEDs stand for. Here's AORUS again. So now it's shut down. I'm going to maybe just try touching the delete key here. I'm assuming since I got the AORUS symbol that the DisplayPort to HDMI adapter is clearly working. There it is again. 1B. I did plug the speaker in. I notice Kerry doesn't always plug the speaker in. I hope it just doesn't sit here and recycle forever, but I'll let it do its thing. It may be just learning where things are. I'm going to try the delete key. Said delete. Yeah, there it is. Fantastic success. All right. It has almost appears to be yesterday's date. How did it know that? I didn't think I connected the Wi-Fi here, or anything. October 16th, 2021. Saturday. So that's yesterday's date. For don't ask me why, but here it is. What a great feeling, man. You got to build one of these. Okay, this is where I need a little humble pie, and thank you, Kerry, for getting back to me so quickly last night. The mystery of the date being accurate on a motherboard that had just come out of the box with no memory, in other words, an empty hard drive, and brand new RAM, virtually new processor. How did it know the date? Well, it didn't quite know the date. The big clue was it was yesterday's date, and later on it occurred to me that, geez, how many hours is it off by? And you know, I forgot. There's a battery on this board, and there obviously is an oscillator running. So from the time they install that battery at the factory to the time you get it and I get it, there's a clock in the background that's been running. And I didn't normally think of that battery as not only a temporary place to hold settings that you put in, but also running a clock. You know, these batteries, I don't believe, are rechargeable, right? They're lithium batteries. Maybe they deserve a little more respect and ought to be checked once in a while. But Kerry was kind enough to get back to me and quickly figured out this board was manufactured in Taiwan, which we've mentioned twice so far in this video. And lo and behold, the 12-hour time difference, they're actually 12 hours behind where we are here on East Coast of the United States. And so when, obviously they had this board plugged in Taiwan, and the time it was built, you know, they set the time and the date, and all this time later when I receive it, perhaps months later, there it is. You know, it knew what day it was. Clearly, there is a clock on this motherboard, and now I know, so I learned something new again. So my humble apologies, Kerry. I really appreciate you getting back to me so quickly last night. I was afraid that, you know, somehow this Wi-Fi was communicating, you know, sending all my personal data overseas, which that's a bit paranoid, but you know, you have those thoughts, right? But no, easy explanation. There's a clock in here. Who knew? Okay, now that we've solved the mystery of the mysterious calendar appearing, I'm very happy with this board now, and it's a great relief that the part I bought, which is technically used, seems to be working just fine. Interestingly, I turned the machine on last night, and it started behaving as you would expect. I have the power, I believe, on the power supply, and here we go. And the machine is not booting like it did when I ran it for the first time. But I am noticing there's a red light here. Again, this motherboard has some features on it so that people can actually work on it out of the case. And there's a power switch here, and there's actually an orange display light back here called flash, and I think it's something to do with clear CMOS. So they're actually lit up, and I haven't turned the computer on yet. So that's kind of new to me. I don't think I ever had a motherboard quite this sophisticated. And I can indeed hit the power switch on the case, and it will respond and do what I expect it to do. I'm not going to run it long. Again, I have no thermal grease in here. I am going to be at the point, though, where I will be putting it in the case. And I just wanted to point out, this now says 3200 megahertz the way it should. When I originally did this, I noticed it was a much lower value than the memory that I paid all that extra money for. And I did have to go into the advanced BIOS and throw that switch. And lo and behold, it did, in fact, figure out XMP. I had it set it to XMP, I think setting 1 or something like that. And now it recognizes it's DDR4, 3200, 16, 20, 20, 38, like 58 memory. So it now recognizes my RAM, and everything is operating where it should. So next step, I went into my garage. I got some 2x4 blocks. I'm going to have to lay this case down in order to do the next steps. I want to raise it off the table so I'm not crushing any of the cables back there. So I'm going to be putting some blocks in the corners here to lift it off the table for that reason. Let me see, I want to shut this down. And I'll hopefully get a camera at an angle where you can see me install the motherboard. I'm going to remove the heat exchanger here, obviously, to get it in the case, and then remake some of these connections. And cannot forget, the first screw I'm going to put in this board is the one under the heatsink for the M.2 drive. They should have provided a hole, maybe. I don't know, maybe they felt it would be more dangerous for a screw to fall in there than having somebody take that plate off. But, oh well, no design's perfect, but this is a wonderful motherboard so far. Okay, I got the best camera angle I could. Don't judge me by the appearance of the house. This can be sort of a messy process here. I had to sort of show you the case sideways because I can't stand where the camera is and vice versa, so we'll have to look at it from this angle. The first thing I think I need to do here is take this plate off because again, this, wouldn't you know it, there's a screw hole to mount into the motherboard right under here, which I can't reach unless I take that plate off. I think I'd prefer to do that outside the case than in, just so I got better access and control. You know, I was concerned about this thermal pad having an adhesive on it. It is a little bit tacky, but it did come off fairly easily. I can actually see some burnish marks on the pad here where it's probably come in contact with chips on the M2 drive. Also, I have the screws that I had removed from the G1Assassin. There's way more here than I'm going to need for this build. I'll be using 9 of them here, and guaranteed the first one that's going to go in is the one underneath that heatsink plate. Then I'll probably put that back and proceed to put in the rest of them. Okay, the big moment has arrived. Drum roll, please. Can't do that on YouTube. They'll probably demonetize whoever uses this video. I do have a small YouTube channel, by the way. I think I have 3 subscribers, which probably friends and family, because that's really the only reason I have it. And I got some videos and things posted up there, all going all the way back. I don't know if I have any from the 1950 home movies, but have some stuff from my college days, and boy, GoPro Max videos. Again, they're up there for very few people, and I'm hoping if this video gets seen and is used, it is done so by Kerry, and anything that happens to come in, I hope he puts it under his moniker, so that if by chance people enjoy watching this, you know, his channel will get the revenue. I certainly don't want or need it. I'm getting so much enjoyment out of making this video, and truthfully, someday my grandkids might even sit down and go to sleep by it. And they'll be able to see their granddad actually do more, because I'm usually behind the camera, not in front of it. This is actually the first one of these I've made. So bear with me for any mistakes I make. I'm sure Kerry will correct them. Good news is the hole in the middle seems to match up, sort of. Not quite. I just need to do a little manipulation here. This board came with the faceplate, the fiducial on the IOs already attached, which is kind of nice. But I'm going to have to jockey it in position to get that middle hole lined up. I don't know if I want to waste your time on camera while I do that and curse. So we'll be right back. Okay, I got that first screw in right here, as the Canadians would say, and I'm now ready to install the other screws. I did get a second one in the corner, so that's good. The board did have to pivot, rotate around that middle screw to get the others into alignment, but the fact I have 2 in place. By the way, I'm using this wonderful Mugen screwdriver. I'm not sure how magnetic my other ones are, but this one is working just fine. And like I say, it's nice accessory for Mugen to include. Their heatsink has got tremendous reviews. If you look it up and see how many 4-star reviews it's received. Now, I'm not tightening these screws. I am barely, leaving them a little bit loose, let's say. Not so loose that they're going to fall out, as happened before, but loose enough that I can make sure that all of them get sort of started and pretty much installed, and then I'll go back and I'll, again, torque. By the way, I should apologize to Kerry to some extent relative to the back bracket on the Mugen. It does need to be tight, you know, not over tight, because I learned that lesson a long time ago, but it has to be, you know, reasonably tight. You have to get feel for how much you can turn a screw before stripping things, and often knowing the material you're screwing into, and with a good quality screwdriver, which I've found over time is almost as important. but it's a good feeling to see this thing go in. I probably should put that heatsink back on the M2 drive, but I will just proceed to get these screws started. Now let's see, I've got one there. I'm going to need a little additional light. Ah, there it is. It's right here. Almost couldn't see it. Hiding in plain sight. You'll notice, if you can see that, I don't know if I can zoom in, these screws do have metal around them. Again, when these screws go in, they are actually pressing down on what I am almost certain is ground plane. I don't know if you can see it around that screw, the little shiny metallic things around the edges there. So the ground plane of this board, or one of the ground planes, sometimes these boards have more than one ground plane, is being case grounded for really good electrical reasons when you're dealing with these kind of frequencies and high-speed electronics. Okay, that's as far back out as I can zoom. Okay, we got, like I say, Kerry, you need to get a light. You may be able to see everything in your studio, but boy, on camera it gets mighty dark in there. Be nice to see what's going on. Okay, again, beautiful screwdriver. Get this thing started. Loosey, not too tight. Okay, that's in enough. So I got 3, 5 down. I'm going to get the one up on top here near the fans. And boy, having a magnetic screwdriver is a really wonderful thing here, because it'd be so easy to drop a screw. And God forbid it gets under the motherboard, then I got to start all over again. So far, not a problem. Okay, that one's in. Now we'll go for the corner. As I said earlier, and I'll say it again, I chose this motherboard. I did get a very good price on it, so that's always obviously a good motivation, right? If you can buy a fairly high-end board for a reasonable price, you know, go for it. I like this so much I was almost tempted to buy a second one, but I don't really need it. It's just, it's that nice to work on. But the main thing was this M2 drive. I didn't want to turn this into a classroom lecture, but there are block diagrams in Gigabyte's manuals, and there's maybe 4 pages that you should probably pay attention to. One of them is a table that discusses the various connectors from the involving the CPU and the M2 positions, and it also they discuss the chipset in here, the Z590, and they show that, you know, some of the ports are connected through the Z590 chip, some go directly to the CPU, and in this particular motherboard, this 4th generation M2 drive sort of has a direct pipeline to the CPU. Now, why is that good for me? Because, again, I'm using some programs that rely on the video that is going to be stored on here and the CPU, and in addition, this GPU is doing most of the labor, most of the work. The GoPro Player software and a lot of the other software out there now is taking advantage of the power of GPUs. About 10 years ago, maybe less than that, I was having lunch with one of the women who's a software programmer, and she was just assigned to start investigating what could we do in terms of software utilizing the power of graphic processing units. And you know, I know for a fact with the GoPro Player software, the GPU made all the difference in the world. The The fact I was running like a 6th generation 4-core processor was not the bottleneck. The fact I had only 16 gigs of RAM in that old Dell XPS machine did not really seem to be a problem. The graphics card I had in, absolutely a problem. And when I upgraded it, I kind of selected probably the lowest end graphics card that would do the job for me, which was that 1650 Super. And again, I did that for a bunch of reasons. I got the single fan so it would fit. The fact it needed a 6-pin connector, which I had in the Dell. And it just made sense to upgrade this machine, because even though it had a wonderful graphics card, it was from 2011 and it absolutely was choking on 4K video. But understand that in this particular motherboard, this graphics card talks more or less directly uninterrupted to the CPU as well. So my hope is that they'll be able to all talk to each other at x16 rates and utilize the full promise of this M2 drive. Whereas there were other motherboards, which are I'm sure they're wonderful motherboards, but you look at the block diagram and all of a sudden you recognize there are dependencies. There are these ports. Some of these ports are run through switches, what's called switches, which means that when you plug something in, they share bandwidth with whatever else is going through that switch. And I did not want to risk having things run slower than I possibly could. So finding this particular motherboard for the types of things I wanted to do, to me, was a wonderful find. So let's finish putting screws in, and enough about ports and programming and how important GPUs are. I will definitely, when the prices start coming back down to planet Earth, strongly consider putting a much better GPU in here. Again, even the ones I have, which I paid roughly $150 for each, I won't go into where I got them, but my point is I could flip those probably tomorrow and make $100 each on them, because graphic processor units have become that scarce. And that's it. Let me finish putting these screws in, and then I'll think, oh yeah, we've got to plug in things like the power connector and some of those things that the Mugen will interfere with. So, right back in a flash. I'm just going around cross circle here to tighten these screws. Just wanted to mention that whenever you have a ring or a bunch of screws, it's always good to do the final torque across corner and try to get even thread pressure around the board. Of course, you already knew that, didn't you? But never bad to reinforce lessons learned. I just wanted to mention, as I'm putting this cover heatsink back over the M2 drive, that it's a little tricky. See if I can zoom in here. This screw on the bottom is captive, so you have a somewhat difficult time. See if I can adjust this a bit. Yeah, this screw down here, it's captive, and I realized after about 20 turns that I was probably screwing into air. Then I noticed that the gap along the heatsink and this PCIe connector, this X16 connector, was not even. So I had to loosen this screw and then lift that up a little bit, because you're kind of screwing it in blind. And I finally got it right, and now I have to torque the one on the top here. But it's a little tricky, and just make sure you actually have the screw grabbing into the standoff down below, because you could really be fooled otherwise. And most likely that would have caused a problem when I went to plug the video card in. I also have to keep in mind, I think the screw on the bottom here, I think, will bottom out. They have like a nut on it. The one on top, I'm going to have to be a little careful, because just like with the Mugen, you know, on the back plate, there are rubber feet. Got to keep in mind that there's a thermal sponge, thermal pad, apparently on the other side of this heatsink in order to connect, you know, let this heatsink do its thing and pull heat out. Again, thermal, I call them sponges, but thermal pads, they serve a purpose, and you know, depending on the needs of what you're trying to remove heat from, they're fine. I just do know that the engineers I've worked with in the past really kind of loathe them in terms of trying to rely on them to pull heat out, because they're not as good actually as metal to metal contact. And as I said before, thermal grease is really only intended to be used in extremely thin layers, just to fill in the air gaps that might exist between two plates. But there's a whole art to thermal design. And again, there are engineers who spend their lives doing nothing but that. And I had the privilege of working with several, some of them the best in the business. Okay, I'm at the point now where all the screws are in, the heatsink cover is back on. Looks like my connectors out the back are in the right place. And the next step is going to be to dress the wires from the back into the CPU connector power, and also connect this fan, the rear fan. Need to do that before I attempt to install the Mugen, so I'm going to have to temporarily lift this case up and probably connect some of these wires. It should be relatively easy, because again, the connectors plugged into this power supply for the G1Assassin. The connectors around this board are pretty much in the same place for this board as the G1Assassin from 2011. The only significant difference I saw is that the USB 3 connectors are right here on the sort of next to the power connector, main power connector, and on the G1Assassin they were down here. So that was another one of the selling points of this board, the fact I had two onboard USB 2 and two onboard USB 3.2, I guess, connectors here to service the front of the case, which is where I work from. I hate having to drag this case out to plug stuff in the back, and I'm constantly doing that, plugging things in. It also has a USB-C, which I don't believe the additional 5 1/4 inch insert I'm going to buy. It has USB-C, but I think it's somehow deriving it off the USB 3 connector. I honestly don't know enough about USB-C to say how that is possible. I do know this USB-C connector will be spare at that point. I'll probably know better when I get that accessory in. I've pulled the one out from the G1Assassin. I saw no purpose leaving it in. It just get in the way with the wiring. Also should mention this power supply. I spoke about it earlier. It's a EVGA Supernova 650P2. Interesting to see that there's still some on the market, and they're actually $10 or $15 less than I paid for it in 2017. Kerry always mentions, make sure you get an 80+% power supply, and yeah, absolutely good thing to do. This is a modular supply. I just wanted to briefly talk about why I chose this one. When I was given the G1Assassin by my son-in-law, he mentioned that he had like a 500, 550 watt power supply. And I'm thinking, gee, that seems a little low. You know, I mean, it was probably fine for what he had in there. But I did a lot of shopping and research. I hadn't really touched the inside of a computer in years, so it was fun seeing what's out there and making decisions and listening to what other people had to say. I chose this supply, the Platinum, for reasons that aren't obvious. It wasn't just the 80% or the fact that it was modular. I actually looked at the data sheets on these and just wanted to mention something that these power supplies have what's called a power efficiency curve, and I've actually plotted some of those in my lifetime. And that is, you vary the load from essentially a small load, not quite no load, to like maximum load, and maybe a little beyond 20%. And you watch to see what the ratio is of the power you're putting in from the wall plug to all the power you're getting out of the supply. And it's never a flat curve. It always has a peak, and then it drops off as you get near the rated wattage. And that was indeed the case with this power supply. And I noticed that in the middle, and typically these supplies have their peak efficiency probably between the 50 and 75% load point, which is an optimum place to run them. This power supply, if I recall, was over 90% in that middle. And moreover, I compared it to the 750 watt of the same series, and it seemed to have better noise characteristics. In other words, the amount of noise on the power line seemed better with this supply. Now, was that absolutely necessary? Probably not. But, everybody has their OCD moments, and that was one of mine. I chose this supply. I don't regret it for a second. The only thought I've had, taking a look at the space heater my son-in-law has in his GPU, the GTX 3090, my God, does that thing get hot. I don't think I'll ever see one of those in here, but there's always that thought in the back of my head that, these GPUs are really power hungry, and I do intend to upgrade the one I have. I'm going to put in here, the 1650 Super, eventually. I just don't want to pay $1,000 right now for a GPU, since the one I have seems to do the job with the programs I'm running. And that's a key point. The GPUs today are doing much more than just putting video on your screen. And yeah, I know the fanatics in the gaming world, they frame rate is everything. Well, not so much to me. The programs I use, the GoPro Max player software in particular, which is a group that I volunteered freely to participate in the beta group. I found out very early on that the video cards I had in my machine were inadequate to handle the 4K, 5.6K video, and certainly on some of the codecs that they're using in their Cinepacks and some of the others. My machines were just choking. And so, on the advice of the admin in that group, he suggested that the GTX 1060, some people have had success with, and that at that point was a 3 or 4 year old GPU, I think. But I was able to pick one up for 150 bucks on eBay, in great shape. Always prefer to buy from a salesperson on eBay that has many sales and 100% rating. I notice people out there with like 0. That's a red flag. You don't want to be like the first time buyer from somebody with no rating whatsoever. Anyway, later on I decided I want to get both machines upgraded, my Dell XPS machine and this one. So both versions of those GPUs I bought, the 1650 Super and the 1060, were short single fan versions. And so both of them fit in the Dell case, and they also required a 6-pin power connector. And I think the 1660 or 1660 Super required an 8-pin, but the Dell machine had a 6-pin connector just hanging there ready to use, and a modest, I think it was either 425 or 450 watt power supply. So I did not want to overtax that power supply in a pre-built machine, where Dell tends to use a lot of, shall we say, custom or not necessarily stock interfaces. So those cards have worked for me. I recognize this machine has not seen the last of me, and I will be tinkering in here in the future. But I just thought that was just some interesting things that you can tuck away, and you're hopefully a little smarter today than you were yesterday. That's how I've lived my life. You learn constantly. It never stops. This is the back of the case where I need to start dressing the wires. Again, this, I guess this case, I believe, I've found probably goes back to 2011, and I'm guessing they didn't have fan connectors on motherboards back then, because they went through the trouble of providing an elaborate fan speed control in here for 4 or 5 fans, and I actually hit the light button on the the panel has a button that 2 of the fans in here were LED fans, and I'll tell you, the screens on this case are so dense that I probably hit that light switch before and never knew it, because I don't know how you even see through the ventilation screens, but sure enough, it lit up red. Anyway, I'll have to deal with those later, but right now I need to get the right connectors here for the CPU power, which, and again, these cables were dressed once. And you can see my bearings here. Okay, that's interesting. These have to go in up here in the corner. You can see that. The CPU connectors are right behind there. And I'll just feed that through enough. And let's see, these are the video card cables, and then this is the power cable, a 24 pin. And okay, this needs to go in up here. Yeah, this connector here, I think, is I left in place. I think it has to do with the fan on top. So I'm just trying to make some early decisions here so I don't screw up the cable management when I get to that stage back here. Again, I'm probably not going to do a crazy job dealing with that, because again, I'm going to be probably in and out of this case, just the way I am and the way it is, right? But I tend to use these Velcro. I do have a whole bunch of the zip ties. I find these Velcro ones convenient for temporarily getting cables to look halfway decent. Okay, so we got the CPU power, main power. I suppose I could, at this point, I have this, let's see, yeah, this connector, this case came with USB 3, which is what this connector is. So I got 2 USB 3 connectors up there. So I could probably poke this through. Again, this used to go down the bottom here on the G1 Assassin, and it looks like it almost wants to go through the same place as the power connector. The power connector is like right up here, and then the USB 3 connector is just below it. So I might as well feed those in. There also were 2 USB 2 connectors up here, and I took the liberty of putting some ties just to sort of group these cables together ahead of time, kind of knowing that they're going to dress down below here. And boy, I believe I made a mistake 4.5 years ago, by the way. I should mention it. There's an audio connector on these motherboards, and it was real fuzzy because the way this case was wired, they have 2 connectors, one which is called HD audio, and the other one was labeled AC 97. Now, what wasn't clear was what was that connector on the G1 Assassin, and which one of these did it expect me to plug in, because as far as I can tell, they're identical in terms of, they block off 1 pin on these connectors to, so you won't plug it in the wrong place, but these 2 connectors happen to have the same exact connector on them. Well, after some careful studying and reading again, information about the case, and also about the motherboards. I've determined that it's the HD audio one I want to be plugging in, and that's what I'll be doing. It also has a USB 2. Again, I tend to use those up here for the little Logitech transmit receive buttons to talk to my mouse and keyboard. Just convenient, rather than have them tucked behind the machine where I forget about them. Anyway, so these will, again, they're all bundled together. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. A lot of these extra panels and cases provide a SATA, eSATA connector on the external of the case. You know, in all my years using, I'm going to say dozens, and it could be even more than that, of, you know, external drives, you know, multiple terabyte, just to contain all the kinds of video that I used to gather at work. I think I only used the eSATA connector one time, because I happened to sign out a drive that had eSATA, and the promise was, well, it's a lot quicker than USB, and perhaps it was, but it was kind of a pain. And so in all this time, and all the drives and things that I've plugged in and out of ports, I probably used eSATA that one time, and I have never used it here at home, and makes me wonder, why do I even want to bother connecting this? I don't think I own anything I'll ever want to plug in here, and you know, just I'll worry about that one later. Let me get this cable in the right place. That will just go to the side right now with the so useful fan connectors. I am leaving two of the fans, the 200 millimeter and then the 120 on the side, plugged into the fan speed control of the case. No particular reason. I just didn't feel like, well, they're 3-pin connectors, and I didn't want to go through the expense of upgrading them. I didn't want them to run all the time, so that was another reason for keeping them up here plugged as case fans. And the side fan here really is to cool the hard drive. That fan is actually blowing through here. So I suppose technically I could plug it into the motherboard. But it'll always be running to some extent, and all I have in here right now is a hard drive and then the solid state Seagate drive that had the operating system on it. Like I say, this case has so much airflow and ventilation that not to concern. But let me see here. Okay, I guess I could go in here, but actually here is actually the best place for this motherboard. The as I said, the board that came out of here was you can either call it an EATX or XL ATX. I've seen it referred to both ways, and it was a much longer board, and it almost came down and touched the power supply. Of course, here this board is probably an inch or two, maybe more like 2 inches shorter. So these cables, I'm sure, will plug in with no problem. And I'm going to turn the case around now so I can work from the front and plug all these connectors in and plug the fans in. And I'll be quickly at a point where it's time to install the Mugen heat exchanger. I brought in another camera to show you why Kerry suggests that you plug these CPU connectors in prior to installing the heatsink assembly, be it the Mugen or the Noctua. Boy, I'm sure if I had that Mugen 5 installed, I'd be in real trouble. These are the two connectors for the CPU up here. They're 8-pin connectors. This power supply provides a Y cable that will service both of those. I also actually had to go back and check the manual because there are two fan headers here. It turns out one is system fan 1, one's system fan 2, so I imagine I can plug this rear fan into either one of those. I'll attempt to plug it into system fan 1 unless my fingers can't get in there. I'm almost wishing I addressed this fan cable a little bit differently. That's always a challenge. They make these cables long enough to accommodate multiple cases and etc. Let me get my light over a little bit. This little LED light, by the way, that I'm using, believe it or not, I bought at the dollar store, which I now hear from my daughters is about to become a $1 plus store. Yeah, wonderful inflation. Anyway, all right, I got to take a look at this fan pin. These connectors are designed for them to go in one way, and one side is totally flat, and the other side has some features that appeared that it would lock into the tab sticking up, which is clearly inboard from the CPU connectors. I apologize for blocking the camera, but that's why it's a tough shot to get. And I'm kind of having to rely on the stiffness of this wire to let me feed that connector in. All right, I think I got it. And of course, the only way I'm going to know is if I pull. No, I guess I didn't have it. It felt like a couple of pins made and some didn't. So bear with me. I think I need another light in here. Yeah, that would definitely help. You're working kind of blind. I mean, there's no easy way to see what you're doing. And you always hope to hear that snap, geez. It's probably going in, all it's going to go in. This may not actually have, now that I look at it, it doesn't actually have a latch. It just has two guides on either side to make sure you don't put it in backwards, but there's no locking feature that I can see or feel on this connector. So that's interesting. I'm thinking I want to get some zip tie on here before I attempt to plug the CPU connectors in. Okay, I got that cable tied. I tied up one here with sort of pinching the service loop, and the other one I decided to pass through the corner hole of the fan here and grab one end of this loop just to keep it down. Really, the objective here is to keep them out of the way and try to do it in a way that's not going to have that connector become undone. I'm just taking a look at this, making sure, because again, there is no locking feature on that motherboard fan connector, so it's going to be totally based on any stress or strain pulling back, and there is none at this point, which is good. I don't know if I need to add any additional ties on it. I don't think so. I just really want to tuck it out of the way so it doesn't interfere with the fan blades or anything else for that matter, and I think it's pretty good. I may decide to add one more here, but I don't want to have any stress on that connection there. And like I say, right now there isn't any, but so I think I'm good. It's time to plug in the CPU connectors. Okay, the two CPU connectors are right here. I kind of, I don't know, I can't really adjust this camera as much as I'd like. Again, it's a second camera. I try to bend these in a way that they would interface with that connector and dress them in. There's a locking feature on the connector here that has to go up away from the motherboard. So again, I apologize for my hands getting in the way, but that's All right. All right, I think, no. Again, I'm almost more pushing on the wire than the connector, but I believe that's in place. And now, same thing on this other one. There's a, you know, a locking tab here, release, if you will, that has to go away from the motherboard. And good, I heard the click there. That's good. I know on some motherboards they have two connectors and you don't necessarily need to plug both in. However, this motherboard said you do, and I'm not going to disappoint it, you know, and then find out that it was a mistake not to pay attention and do what they said. So I've got both of those connectors serviced. I'm just trying to take a mental inventory here to see if there's anything else I should be plugging in before I attempt to put the Mugen on. There, you know, there is a gray, and it nice enough to make it gray connector header there for the CPU heatsink fan, so I'll know which one to plug it in. This board has so many fan connections because I think it anticipated water cooling that it can get confusing. So making that connector gray is actually very helpful. I think I'm going to snip the ends of these cable ties off, and then I'm going to, and again, this, I don't really have what you call a great tripod here. All I'm going to do is go down and, you know, plug in the main power connector, which is right here where I fed it through, and the USB connector, USB 3 connector, which is right underneath. They're into one of the two USB connectors here on the board. Again, I'll be filling the other as soon as I get that front panel insert. And then it'll be down to the bottom here to plug in the front panel connector, which, and boy, is that a nice little feature, that you can pre-wire that and just plug it in. I mean, that's really great. I have two USB connectors. I believe I have one from the case that I'll be plugging in down below here. This board has, you know, the audio connector over here, which again I said is an should be the HD audio, and I can't focus this close. I just wanted to point to these two switches. This board has a dual BIOS, and you can apparently select, you know, BIOS 1, BIOS 2, dual BIOS or not dual BIOS. I'm not sure, honestly, what the best way to set those are. I'll have to make that decision. First I'm going to see how they're set now, hoping the factory helped me out here. I only need one BIOS when I first power this up, and I see no reason at this point to play with those switches until I truly understand how to use them. One of the things I need to check off the post screen is the BIOS that's installed in this machine versus what's on the Gigabyte website. I am probably not going to touch the BIOS for a while. Dual BIOS or not, if everything seems to be working, I'm going to walk gingerly until I watch a few more Kerry videos. Of course, dual BIOS is supposed to protect me, right? But again, not knowing exactly how to use such a thing, I will walk cautiously. Just wanted to make a quick note to self. Plugging that power connector in takes a reasonable amount of force. Let's just put that reasonable. I had to run my fingernail along the gap between the two connectors, and I noticed that on one side it seemed like there was a slight gap, so I had to push a little harder at the top to fully seat it. What I really wanted to mention is that USB connector. Wow. You really need to come into that delicate connector. There's like 10 rows of very, very fine pins, and obviously there's a big bend on that cable. You really need to come into that connector as square as possible. I had to make at least a half a dozen or more attempts, and I kept hearing the springs ting, and so I back off. I finally made sure I came in square and had seen the seat. On one side, honestly, I was concerned that it hadn't seated all the way. I actually came in with an inspection mirror, and it looks like the key tab on it is bottomed out, but there's still a little more gap than I might have wanted, but I believe it's in, and I am not going to play with it until I test those USB 3 ports on the front of the case. I don't want to have to pull it off and try to reinsert it. I think it's in there fine, but boy, it's delicate. I just wanted to make that note of caution. If you have to deal with these connectors, they're just incredibly fragile. Last thing I wanted to do was to bend one of those pins, because they're usually very difficult to recover from. Okay, it's time for the Mugen 5 cooler stage installation. We've just gone through plugging the various connectors in. Again, caution with that USB 3 connector and stress put on it. It's a fragile connector, and that has to really be mounted square. I'm not going to play with it. Treat it very carefully. I'll be plugging another one in later, but I am going to have to check electrically to make sure I didn't inadvertently bend a pin underneath the connector. You would think I maybe saw that happen before in my career. Boy. Anyway, I watching Kerry do this, a lot of people talk about adding the thermal grease, to CPUs, and it's kind of funny. There's the P method where they just put a dab in the middle and then rely on the heatsink to squish it down. And then there's some guys make an X. And then there's the Kerry way. Boy, I guess I technically should have a strap on my wrist. Just, it's habit. Yeah, the Kerry way, nitrile glove. It paused me to think of another story from my early career. This is an adult channel, right? The story had to do with something called finger cots. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen a finger cot. I hadn't when I was just out of college, and we had a high-speed bearing lab, a clean room. You may or may not know what a clean room is. It's a special room where they do everything in their power, including filtration, to make sure that the particulates of dust in the air are kept to a minimum. And there are various levels depending on whether, what you're building and what it's for. I mean, space tends to be probably the most severe. Anyway, I'm in the bearing lab and I got my booties on, to make sure I don't track any mud in. And they used to have this tacky mat when you walked in to take anything off the bottom of your shoes, and you would cover them. And depending on the level of the clean room, you might have to put just a jacket on, and usually some kind of cap, just so your hair doesn't get anywhere. And I've been in clean rooms where, you're talking like total, spacesuit type office. But this was a, I forget what class it was, but I noticed this candy jar there, and inside are all these things. And I won't, like I say, this maybe kids watching. They reminded me of something that basically, when you're working on something like and this happened to be a bearing lab, a ball bearing or whatever, wearing gloves like this for extended periods, if you've ever done it, I mean, your hands sweat, and you just, it's, yeah, they do a great job, but let's face it, you sweat inside, and if you wear them long enough, you can virtually fill them with sweat. And so they had these finger cots that are these little, basically separate fingers that you could roll onto your finger, if you're getting, maybe you can see where I'm going with this. and it allowed you to, you know, do things like handle the bearing, and so you only had, because you only had coverage on whatever number of fingers you wanted to put a card on, you know, you hand it in sweat, and you could work for quite a while in there. And you know, so I got to appreciate why they exist, and I think I've even seen them in drugstores. But you know, I had the story is I had a couple of these in this little transparent plastic case in a drawer, and one day my niece is over, and she's with my daughter, and they had to get something out of the drawer, and they open it up, and I see my niece with this look on her face, and she's kind of, you know, pointing at the drawer with her nose and looking at my daughter. I look over and I say, what's the matter? You know, well, nothing. Well, why, you know, she basically bug-eyed at this point. And what I realized, they mentioned those things. And I go, oh, you mean the finger cuts? And then I started suddenly realizing that, you know, my teenage daughter and my niece had probably grown, probably a lot more mature than I was at that age. But I explained, you know, what they are, what they're used for, and then I just left through them. Anyway, but for today, I'm not going to use a finger cut. I'll sacrifice one of my nitrile gloves, and forgive me, I don't think I've ever really done this before. Maybe once. Yeah, I've used thermal grease, so I've just never put it on a processor and used the carry finger technique. And you know, the pea size drop is what's recommended. Now, how big a pea really? I think that may be enough. If I have to add more, I always can. And just for the heck of it, before I get my finger all smushy here, you can maybe zoom in a little. And I kind of like the idea of what Kerry does, because, you know, let's face it, this is a metal case, and metal conducts heat, right? And you know, I've seen people pull heat sinks off, and there's just this circle spot in the middle. That's why some people probably put X's on. Yeah, and there's definitely enough grease on there. And again, this stuff is supposed to be, you know, thermally conductive, but not electrically conductive. And I don't know if I have too much on there. I'm going to just wipe my finger back and forth, and then I'm going to grab a paper towel and clear my finger. If you have to remove thermal grease, now's the time. Paper towel. Good thing I'm in the kitchen. Okay, wipe it off my finger. I'm just going to go back over this. And again, if these surfaces were truly flat, you wouldn't need this stuff, right? But the problem is, as my friend John would point out, a wonderful mechanical engineer, you put flat surfaces are never really flat, and they always touch at 3 points until you sort of deform them. And I say I mentioned there are people that actually lap the tops of these things, and even in some cases they even remove the lid, you know, to try to get more heat, you know, put liquid stuff inside. I mean, just nuts what people do, and I'm not going to ever push this that hard, and nor do I ever want to take that kind of risk. But I'm just going to thin that layer out. I didn't think I put enough, but maybe I put too much. And I'll just wipe it off my finger. And I'm going to do the carry dab. I thought that was a cool idea. You know, just dab your finger and make some points. That way, wherever the air gaps are, they'll have a better chance of wicking some of that thermal grease. Because that's all you're really trying to do, is there may be little pockets of air where the metal to metal contact isn't happening, and this is, you know, more thermally conductive than air. So I guess I'm done. I can maybe take my glove off. All right, let me zoom back out, and boy, this is like the other sort of moment in the build, you know, where I guess I've removed the heatsink and put it back on. I've never dealt with again, these modern processors, modern sockets, and in those cases it was an old computer, so I wasn't as concerned about, you know, being a bull in a china shop. Okay, the glove is off. My hand didn't sweat too bad, so here we go. Okay, save this thermal grease. Like I say, you can pay $10, $20 a tube sometimes for this stuff. It happens to be very good stuff from Scythe, and I'm saying that based on tables I saw where they incredibly evaluated, you know, tens, possibly hundreds of thermal greases, and these and the Nugan greases came out fairly good. All right, now I'm struggling to get the heatsink out of the box because I did not put it in there as carefully as I should. Okay, got it. All right, so on this assembly, nice of them, very, very well thought out design. They allowed space for the fan, and so clearly this is the side that goes towards the memory, and so it's an offset heat exchanger. I love the idea that they have 6 heat pipes in here on either side. Somebody demonstrated heat pipes to me. It's almost like magic. They handed me one of these heat pipes and they told me, you know, oh, here, I got a hot cup of coffee, I'm through with it, stick one end in. And so I had it by the top, and you know, man, it just, like right away, you feel the heat in the other end. But let's get to this. This is kind of the easy part, in a sense, because this is going to drop in place. I'd already dry fitted it. It's a matter of getting those screws in the right place. And let me grab the wonderful Mugen screwdriver. That's a nice little bonus that they give you. And of course, I have it way out of the way. Nothing like being prepared. Here we go. Whoop. Yeah, like I say, nothing like being prepared, kicking the tripod. Okay, I'm going to try to catch this one first, just because it's easier access. And I think I got it. And then, as Carrie's pointed out many times in the Mugen, I'm going to get a light down there. The light I have is staged, obviously, to the right, and I want to see what I'm doing. I want to make sure when I start turning that screw that actually lined up. Because you can see down the bottom, sort of. Want to get my screwdriver in the right place, and all right, I think I got it. Yep, I'm seeing the spring compress. Okay, because again, this is like a dual spring system. The springs under these screws are sort of putting force down on the 2 flat surfaces there to squeeze them together. And you know, you can bottom these screws out, but you still got that spring pressure there. And then you have the rubber on the other side, so you're kind of in an accordion sandwich here. And that's all you really want. You want to just squeeze out as much air and thermal grease as you can, get those metal surfaces touching as much as you can. All right. And so you can sometimes feel like you can keep turning here. So again, the amount of torque, you notice I'm tending to use 2 fingers here. I don't want what happened to me in my first week at work. It's amazing how that's embarrassing moments in your life never leave you, do they? That's probably why I'm still alive, right? Because you'll learn from those things, and you never forget. God, crunch, crunch, crunch. That ceramic thermal pad under that transistor was powder. It's like, yeah, the kid knows what he's doing. Let's give him another job. All right, I'm at a point now where my fingers are slipping, and I'm not really trying to force this thing. And this one here turned a little more, but again, it's pretty tight. And I'm sure if I look, get a little more light on the subject, I'm going to probably see it's bottomed out. But I'll almost bet that the bosses that stick out of the side of the Mugen 5 are actually not touching the standoff, or the bracket, if you will, that they're being screwed into, because you want, I mean, you don't want to bottom out there and then not have pressure on the CPU, right? The whole idea is to squish the plate of the heatsink onto the CPU. So there's probably a tolerance in there. Okay, now, the part I don't think I've ever done before, install the fan. Now, I mentioned before, a couple of things, as my son-in-law pointed out. The side of the fan with these vanes tends to be the exhaust side where the air blows. So they need to go essentially towards the heatsink and blow air through. And then, you know, the hope is that this case fan, which is blowing here out of the case, will pick that air up and we'll get an airflow through the heat exchanger. Just interesting side note, in space systems, I worked with some thermal engineers who designed systems for satellites. And in fact, the company I worked at, again, I've had continuous service, but the original owner, Honeywell, actually did the star tracker for the Voyager satellite. And so that's the kind of caliber of people I'm dealing with. And I remember one thermal engineer always saying, you know, you want to pull air through a heatsink, not try to blow it through. But you see, you have to design the heatsink to do that. You know, you can't. I'm just trying to get it this twist tied. That you see, this is the problem. I should have done this before I installed the heatsink. So now I'm trying to get back there. Just here we go. I don't know if you remember the old putting a baseball card with a clothespin on a bicycle wheel. Well, the end of that zip tie, if it hit the fan, I would probably hate it because it would rattle as the fan went around. Okay, that's gone. Heatsink is on. And I was talking about the direct airflow direction of the fan. Apparently there's a lot to these fans. Again, this one is from Mugen. It looks really nice. I'm sure it's the type of fan best suited to push air through the heatsink. I was talking about space where they like to draw heat through, and I'll explain the reason why. This fan consumes heat, if you think about it. You're putting a voltage on here, it's doing work. It's actually creating heat, and in a real delicate situation, you don't want to add the heat of the fan onto the heat of the load you're trying to maintain coolness on. So they would always try to design heat exchangers that control the airflow. Basically, that would mean this would have to be like a continuous case, so that when the fan tried sucking air or sucking air through, basically, you know, you wouldn't have air coming in from the sides defeating the purpose here. The airflow would be across the surface of the heat exchanger. But this heat exchanger is not designed that way. And there are a lot of cases where you are better off blowing air than trying to draw through. But they would design their systems and the enclosures for the heat exchangers so that they could control the airflow. Anyway, just a small tidbit here. This fan is going in where Mugen says it should go in. It's going to blow air through. This will face towards where the ribs are. The fan will rotate. The blade designs, I'm sure, are such to push volume air through. And I have elected to bring the cable on this fan out this corner and then wrap it down, and I've actually captured it under this bracket, which to me is preferable than having to deal with the bundle. And then I will be plugging it into that gray fan connector. But first thing is, get this, yeah, see, that's the danger of already having these tabs on. From the dry fit, I want to make sure I get this aligned correctly. And then, okay, that's caught. And, oh, not quite. There we go. I can reach around, and I'm doing this kind of blind, which maybe is not a good idea. And I got to make sure the tab is in where it belongs. And push that cable down. Okay, I think it's in place, but I'm gonna walk around just to do an inspection, make sure I caught that second tab. Again, I was doing that blind, so I don't want to have to do it again. Yep, looks good. And looks like it's where it wants to be. Completely clear of the memory. Yep, and there's room, conveniently room to add the 2 more sticks of RAM if I choose so. While I'm on this side, it's actually a good point to plug the fan into the gray fan connector. Again, apparently these fan connectors don't have any latching system. They do have 2 flutes on the side so that they can only go in one way. But you're really relying on the friction of the pins into the sockets to hold them in place. There's no latch, only guide. So this is actually a good angle if I can get my fingers out of the way. Okay, I believe I'm in. The guides have done their job, I hope, and appears to be in the right direction. I just want to check. Yeah, okay. Again, I'm thinking I want to just grab that inspection mirror. Not that I'm paranoid or anything, but hard to see down there, and inspection mirrors are a good little tool sometimes. This one here is, you know, probably a Harbor Freight special. I kind of like it, and it's good for seeing where you wouldn't be able to otherwise see. I guess that's why dentists use them. And I can get down here, and yes, I can see the 2 flutes on the fan socket on either side of the gray tab sticking up. So it's in the right position and appears to be seated properly. So, one more thing out of the way. Getting close to bringing this guy up for real, and taking that Windows 10 thumb drive that I have recently downloaded, the latest Windows 10. By the way, there's excellent value in doing that. Both my son-in-law and I have you know, retail editions of Windows 10 and DVDs that, you know, have the software on it. But that software is old now, and so he attempted to use his disk to put Windows 10 in his new computer, and fortunately, I have been watching Kerry, and you know, he left links of where to grab the you know, latest or a later version of Windows 10 off the internet, and I had done that, and I even made him a thumb drive, but it turns out he beat me because I sent him Kerry's links, and he was getting totally frustrated trying to get Windows 10 installed using the disk he had. And after about 4 or 5 times of it just stopping like midstream and not going through, he remembered what I told him. He pulled up the links that I had sent him from Kerry. He made himself a thumb drive, and bang, voila, he was good to go. So one more time, Kerry, you're not only helping me, but you're helping my son-in-law. I'm trying to make him a fan of your channel. Every time I'm over his house, I put you on. make him watch, and learn. So here we go. I guess I got to stop and pause and think, okay, what next? Now, I have not plugged in any of the SATA connectors at this point. I just ought to mention that. Nor have I plugged in the graphics card. I think even Kerry pointed out, sometimes there's value in not having too many things that can go wrong. And so if a problem arises, you can sort of narrow down the field of what could be causing it. I certainly don't want to plug in the SATA drive that has Windows 10 on it, because the BIOS will sniff around and find it and then assume, here it is, and I don't want that. So that drive shouldn't get plugged in. There's no reason to plug in my hard drive that has a bunch of files and things on it that this thing doesn't even need to know about at this point. I could plug in the graphics card, I suppose, but I love the idea the processor has a video output. I'm going to use it. I have my little adapter here for the HDMI. Convert the output of this case to HDMI to my TV set. It'll be almost forced to look at that USB. I don't know if I have to go into the BIOS and tell it to look for that. I haven't got into this BIOS enough. Usually in the old ones there was an order you could set, which device do you want to look at first, and I would often set it up for my DVD drive, USB drive, and hard drive. Now that actually caused me a problem. Another little interesting life experience here. I tend to plug lots of things into the USB port, and I was having some real trouble, like with this set. The G1 version of it, and I actually had to reload Windows 10 multiple times, and never occurred to me that I still have something plugged into the USB port, and I think a number of the blue screens that I used to get might have been because of things like that. And interestingly, on the last install of Windows 10, I finally figured out, make sure there's nothing plugged in the USB port. And in fact, even on my Dell, I was having failures to do Windows 10 updates. And I would scratch my head thinking, how can this be? Dell is actually coming in every once in a while, updating the BIOS and handing me reports, and never thought about the fact that I have these backup 5 and 8 terabyte drives backing up my computer, and I tend to back up the entire C drive. Maybe shouldn't be doing that, but it's making a faithful copy of my Windows 10 program, probably. And maybe when Microsoft comes in at 2 in the morning and tries to do an update, it gets confused, especially since I'm maybe telling the BIOS to take a look at what's plugged in the USB port before you go to the hard drive. That's just a guess, by the way. I was having trouble a week or two ago, and my machine, I thought my Dell was broken, which is never a good feeling, to try to turn your machine on and it thumbs its nose at you. And then it occurred to me, why don't I unplug those backup drives? And son of a gun, the machine booted and came up just like it should, and it has been running fine ever since. I then plugged my backup drives in and just shook my head thinking, wow, I wonder how long that has been causing me grief, and I didn't even realize it. Like I say, I'm not going to, at this stage, plug in my DVD drive, my Blu-ray drive, or my hard drives. I'm going to, obviously I have the M2 drive in place. So, after a little meditation, and I'll be brave enough to sit this computer up, and we'll put a thumb drive in and go through some more Kerry lessons of loading Windows 10. All right, ready to roll here. I've got my wireless keyboard and mouse. The dongles for those are plugged into the back. My TV is connected using that adapter. Display port to HDMI. Again, this is a TV set. I love the sound when I hear that TV turn on. It's why in this build I always put that little speaker in. I don't care if it makes 1 beep, 2 beeps, 3 beeps. Oftentimes I'll turn the machine on. The fact I hear that beep says, okay, you know, I didn't forget to plug something in, which I almost did. Okay, wireless keyboard and mouse. I have the Windows 10 disk here, USB drive. I downloaded this on 9/2021, so sometime in September, which is probably recent enough. Again, my son-in-law had real problems trying to use his retail, you know, disk he bought from Microsoft. It wouldn't really take because it was too old. And he learned from me watching this channel that, you know, follow Kerry's link and make a USB drive. All right, I'm going to boot it up the first time here just to get a BIOS screen before I plug that in. I've decided to plug everything in the back here, even though these are technically active and alive right now. I want to make sure that after doing all I've done here, including put the cooler on and the cooler heatsink and plugging everything in, that I didn't break something. So I want to get back to baseline, which is a post screen, you know, 40 degrees or better on the processor, and then I'll be able to shut it down, and then we can plug in the USB drive and we'll attempt to install Windows. Fantastic. So first let's first let's turn the power on. At this point I don't really need a wrist strap. Everything is sealed up, grounded. I'm not going to touch anything inside. I've left these hanging out. They're really just the SATA wires that are plugged into the drives, and you know, no need to. I'm going to be filling that spot shortly with a adapter. Okay, here we go. Red lights. These are blinking because saying where's your connection? Aha. Okay, 1 beep. That's always good. Now it's saying hit delete. Well, maybe I missed it. Oh, okay, we got it. CPU temperature 29 degrees C. Looking good. Going to 30. It's pinching me. It's funny. It's pinching me like 7.77 points megahertz on my RAM. It's 3199.23 megahertz, which I guess is close enough to 3200. Okay. CPU temperature seems to be holding at 30. So there's an example now. I had originally I had the heatsink dry mounted. Now I got the thermal grease in there and I've tightened everything down. And before I used to see, you know, 40 degrees pretty much right off the bat turning this thing on. And now it's sitting at 30-31, which good for me. Okay, just for the heck of it, yep, I got mouse control, wireless mouse control. I'm not sure what I could touch here on the keyboard. I'll assume it's working. I don't want to screw something up in the BIOS. But I'm going to shut down and then plug this in. Again, I'm going to do it in the back. Only because I don't want to introduce new potential problems that I'm going to have to troubleshoot if for some reason, and I don't believe I did, but again, I'm a little nervous with that USB 3 connector to the motherboard because as I said, the fragile pins and the connector that plugged into them, the openings for the sockets are so small that there wasn't really a good feed, you know, for those little delicate pins. So you really had to get things just lined up dead on. And I think I did that, but again, I will test all those things afterwards. Right now, the goal is to get Windows 10 installed. I am not going to connect to Wi-Fi or Ethernet whatsoever. That seems to be the consensus when you first do this. I do remember at work when we had, like, network computers controlled by IT, that they would always want like a local copy and a remote copy. And most times when you turned your machine on, you were relying on that remote profile, but there was always one on the machine, and I think that might be created when I boot up this way. Okay, the USB drive's in. Here's the big moment. Again, I did nothing in the BIOS to tell it what to look for. I'm hoping it will go through the list and find the USB. And I see the little wheel there. That's probably a good sign. Aha! Here we are. All right. English, United States, US. Yes. Enter your language. Okay, where's my mouse here? All right. That's not good. Okay, I got a problem. Now, why is that? Okay, time to take a pause here and see what's going on. Okay, this is real interesting. I checked in back of the machine. I'm thinking, gee, the mouse is not responding at all, and it clearly was when all I had on was the the BIOS screen. So I went in back and I looked, and for whatever reason, I had elected to plug the USB stick into one of the blue connectors back there. They have blue and red. I guess USB 3.1 and one is red, maybe 3.2 or something like that. And I noticed that the little dongles for my keyboard and mouse were also plugged next to it into blue slots in the in back there. So I said, geez, I've had issues with USB before, causing interference. So I pulled those little tabs, dongles, whatever you want to call them, out for the keyboard and mouse. I plugged them on top here. I figured, hey, at this point, that's where I've always plugged them. And I rebooted, and lo and behold, I got mouse control. So I'm not sure what happened there, if it's a one-time event or there was some issue with the keyboard and mouse connectors being plugged into the same bus somehow as the USB, but it seems to be working. It says install now. Down here it's repair your computer, which obviously I'm not doing. So setup is starting. We're on our way here. I do have a product key. Now, this will be interesting because the product key for this retail disc was assigned to the G1Assassin board. I'm going to interrupt the video momentarily and retrieve that code. I also have disc retail versions of Windows 7. I could try that, although I do happen to have that installed on a machine just sitting. Hasn't really plugged that machine in quite a while. So interesting. We'll back in a flash. Okay, says we're recording. I found a copy of my Windows product key. Now, again, this was a retail version, and what I was told on the internet, Google, was that if you have a retail version and all you're doing is transferring it from one machine to another, that you can do that, because it was Windows 10 Professional. Now, I entered it here, and of course I'm not connected to the internet, so what is it now? It seemed to accept it, and I'm ready to move on to the next step. I accept the license terms. And Kerry mentioned that I have more copies of Windows than you can imagine. couple of 98, Windows 7. You get them, sometimes you get them bundled with the machines, like with the Dell machines, but no, those are OEM, and I don't believe those are transferable, because of the way you procured them. But this was a direct retail box version, as is my Windows 7, right from Microsoft. So, well, we'll see how we go. It may come back and bite me later, and I'll have to either do a dance with Microsoft to get them to accept the transference. Now, I think they always said do a custom install, so that's what I'm doing. Now, this is a brand clean new drive, so there is nothing on it. I don't need to, I don't think I need to format it. Anyway, I'm just going to hit next. There's only one partition here, and it is 931.5 gigabyte free space. So I'm going to hit next. I suppose if it needed to be formatted, it's copying Windows files, getting files ready for installation, and it's at 1, 2, 3, 7, 10. Wow, man, this is going a lot quicker than what I had to deal with in the past. I'm not sure if I'm going to let this roll, while all this happens. Although there's no reason not to film it, I can edit it out afterwards. Already at 71%. Boy, I remember going for coffee when this stuff used to load. But sort of the good news is the USB port back there is working. It's clearly has read the software. The ports up here, I plugged into the USB 2 ports here. I felt safe doing that, by the way, because the USB 2 connector is much more robust and was a much cleaner, easier fit. It was really the USB 3 connector that I'm concerned about, and I will check that separately. Again, I don't want to do something here that I'm going to have to go back and repeat. Keep the system simple. Okay, that was one beep. I'm assuming I just sit here and wait while it figures out what the heck is in this machine, and hopefully it'll attempt to load all the correct drivers. That's another key point, by the way. I saw a few complaints online about this board. People complaining about the 10 gig internet and the audio HD, and to which someone responded, load the Gigabyte drivers. So that's probably great advice. Don't assume that Microsoft, in its wisdom, has all the latest and greatest drivers for a particular component from some vendor. So that is definitely going to be one of the steps I go through here, including loading the Magician software for Seagate, and then I'll be going on to Gigabyte's drive for this motherboard. I actually meant to do this earlier. I'm curious if the BIOS has an update to it. I don't care if it does. I'm not going to play with that. And I think even Kerry suggested that for several weeks. It'd probably work fine, certainly in the beginning. And also, it is always at risk with BIOS. And there's like 2 or 3 ways of updating BIOS. And I saw Kerry do a video of that using the Gigabyte, I forget what they call it, support software. And when I attempted to just take a look at that on my Assassin board, it just didn't look the same. I have to actually go back and watch his video again. I think he may have been updating the BIOS. The software allows you to install drivers, do all kinds of neat stuff. So I'm going to take advantage of it. Am I in the United States? Yes, I am. So it's saying let's start with region. Is this the right keyboard layout? I'm going to assume so in the US. Want to add a second keyboard layout. Skip. I'm going to say I don't have internet. Protect and secure your device and personal data. Full setup with Microsoft account. No. I'm not sure how to turn, oh, continue with limited, okay, that's what I want to do. It's asking me three things there, and they took the liberty of putting check marks next to things that I don't know if I want to agree to advanced security and privacy, free access to Office Online, Outlook, Skype, and more. I have 2 full sets of Microsoft Office. I think the latest might be certainly no further back than 2015, maybe 2017. They do fine. I don't really want to rely on a pay per year. You know, for the limited amount of things that I do with Microsoft Office, which is primarily occasional Word documents and such. You know, occasional spreadsheets in Excel, and I rarely do PowerPoint anymore. Although that's a great program. What I have should suffice. I don't want something where I'm on the hook, you know, with Microsoft forever for their cloud, or any company for that matter. I got to keep paying every year, whether I want to leave them or not. They got all my data, and if I want to keep it, you know, I have to keep paying them. So I like having physical disks. You know what I'm saying? A medium that belongs to me. Unlock best Windows 10 features. Well, we'll get there. But right now I'm going to continue with limited startup. All right, who's going to use this PC? What name do you want to use? And I think this is what they're going to label, you know, to identify the computer. And the G1 Assassin was called RS-G1. I'm going to name this RS Master after the motherboard. And I do this so that occasionally I'll have services like Malwarebytes. Been a fan for many, many years. That program has saved my butt more times than I can tell you. I hear Kerry is trying to, you know, contact those folks. They are actually very nice people. And I have one key from them that was like a lifetime license I bought. And I had to negotiate for the second license for the G1. But boy, for what it's worth, I do run that, and I run Norton. The Norton was more a hangover from my internet service provider. They used to give it for free, and so I had it in my machine for years. You know, they had transferred at one point from McAfee to Norton. I had no problem with Norton. I felt comfortable. You know, on rare occasions, when you know, if I'm not going to tell you what I might do, but I want the security and I want somebody watching. Oftentimes I'll click on a link, you know, because they entice you, and Malwarebytes or Norton will come up and say, we blocked, you know, do you want to proceed? This link has, you know, in some cases with Malwarebytes, you know, Trojan detected, bang. Anyway, enough. I don't get any money from anybody. I'm just talking from the heart about, you know, what I've done and what's worked for me, and I'm a paid user just like you probably would be. But anyway, let's move. But anyway, when you bring some of those features up, sometimes they will refer to, well, you know, you have 2 licenses, and do you want? So yes, sometimes you have to, like, I'm going to probably have to remove the G1 Assassin off a couple of different things I have in order to get this machine, this newly rebuilt machine. I am not going to use a super memorable password at this point. Okay, here we go. Now, some people recommend get location. I guess it's a matter of preference, right? Sometimes that's handy, sometimes it's not. I know the guy who gave me his 2 cents online. He just turns all this stuff off. You certainly don't want advertising ID. For now, I'm going to turn off location. I'm going to turn off everything. I think Kerry sometimes leaves location on. And but you know, if you're one of those people, and not that I am, that, you know, have a Netflix account and you want to pretend you're in the UK so you can watch stuff that they wouldn't normally let you watch, sometimes that little switch might be problematic. Just guessing. I'm not 100% sure about that, but You know, they don't need to know. Everybody, they probably know more than I ever want people to know. And I got stories there, boy, about services that have been hacked. Let Cortana help you get things done. I'm going to say not now, because I really don't know what that does. I could be putting bloatware on here that I will regret for the rest of my time. And so it's saying, hi, it's okay, they're getting everything ready. That's good, we can talk right now while all this is happening. And again, this video is really for Kerry and you and his community, who I hope get a chance to see some of this. Boy, watching his channel has become just a great pastime sometimes. I learned so much, even with all the years I've had as an engineer. There's just stuff you don't know, and it's always better if I have this personal belief that if you have a chance in your life to surround yourself with the smartest people you can work with or learn from, you really need to do that. It is so great having the people that can just turn a light on and save you so much time and effort. This may take several minutes. I will not turn my PC off, and hopefully we have a good power grid here. It is so great. Watching Kerry saved me so much time and concern building this machine that I can't tell you. Even simple things like installing the Mugen cooler or how to deal with those new sockets. And again, I'm no novice with that type of interposer interface on that processor. But, you know, there's a little subtleties there, you know, like leave the plastic cap on, you know, while you close the lid. I mean, otherwise I might have easily looked at the remove and then pried that thing off, probably bent something out of shape and been a very miserable camper. But, you know, I've seen Kerry, and I love when Mitch has to do it. I mean, or maybe I just saw it his first couple of times. Hopefully but I had that same, you know, nervousness, because I know how fragile those little springboards can be down on that socket. They're, you know, and tiny, and you know, having watched Kerry repair some. Browse the web with Microsoft Edge. Maybe later. I don't use Microsoft Edge. App Center. Would you like to download and install drivers and Gigabyte utilities via the App Center? Well, since I don't have the App Center at this point, or internet connection rather, I guess I need to hit cancel here. Why don't I use Microsoft Edge? I have no idea. Habit. You know, they did change their browser. You can't remember what the original one was. I used to use all the time. Explorer, I guess, Internet Explorer. And I was pretty comfortable with that one. I tried various browsers, Netscape for one. There's a Google browser, Chrome. You know, every time I use Chrome, and I do sometimes because I have a Google subscription and there's a Google Drive, and anyway, long story, my nephew worked for Google for a time. Every time I turn that browser on, I will get invariably within a fairly short time, and I want to say it's Malwarebytes will pop up and say, we've detected another, you know, blah blah blah. Do you want to quarantine them? And so every time I run that, I need to hit, yeah, get rid of them. I don't need anybody snooping. I mean, there was probably enough stuff on my machine already that they probably know what color underwear I'm wearing. I mean, it's awful. And I never use the same password anywhere. A little piece of advice. On most all services or anything that I sign up to, I will do my best not to use my email address or one of my email addresses. If I can pick a unique identifier, I will. And I will definitely create a unique, difficult to crack password, which might save me from 99.9% of the hackers, novice hackers out there. I'm not going to pretend for a second that there aren't people out there that could crack open my machine anytime they wanted. It's a scary world out there. I'm at the point now where I get tons of email. I mean, my old email address that I use, I must have to throw away, 50, 100 emails a day. A lot of them I recognize. Some of them I'm still not quite sure where they came from. But they all want you to click on a link, unsubscribe. Well, who's to say that clicking on unsubscribe might not be the worst day in your life? You know what I'm saying? You don't know where that link is connected. And even though you may want to get rid of them and never see them again, you got this trade-off. Do I want to change my email address and then inform my 100 friends, hey, no longer send me stuff here because I've moved on. So change is painful. Maybe at some point I will smarten up and create a parallel email address and then look at both of them and then over time transfer the important stuff to the second one. Try to notify all the people in my address book, many who haven't probably heard from me for years, and some who may scratch their heads and says, who is this person? Change is hard, but definitely I know Kerry talks about this company that will keep track of all your various passwords. My daughter uses a similar service like that, and she loves it. I have not made that transition yet. I still keep a handwritten notebook with my identifier and my unique password, and I actually lock that in the safe. Some of the, I almost never, when a pop-up screen comes up, do you want to save this password? I'll almost always hit no. There are some, where I feel, well, if anybody hacks this, who cares? Those I'll maybe let the machine remember. But password management is a good thing. Well, I'm up here. I may be done. My goodness. Wow. It went so quickly. I hope you think so. I mean, I've seen Kerry put out 6-hour YouTube videos. I don't know how long this is going to run after I wrap it up, but I'm going to say right now, I think I've gone as far as I'm going to go with this video. And thank you for the umpteenth time, Kerry and Mitch. I enjoy watching the two of you. And maybe someday I'll meet you in IRL. You never know. It's a small world. Have a good life.